That was a very lively welcome from me, to the 33rd meeting of the Committee of Finance in the 22-27 mandate. As always, this committee meeting will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online. So members and those in the public gallery, as always, please put your phone on silent or airplane mode. Wi-Fi is available. We have apologies from Nicola Brogan and Owen Tennyson.
And Philip Brett as well.
And now Philip Brett. Steve Aiken will be joining us virtually later, and we have two members, Jerry and Deirdre, who are joining us remotely via Zoom. The next agenda item is declaration of interests. Members are obviously free to declare interest as we go, but are there any interests now? Anyone wishes to declare? No? Okay.
Well, yes, Matthew.
Oh, sorry, Deirdre, go on ahead.
Apologies. No, it's just a bit on adoption, just that my brother adopts or fosters, so
okay.
Just to declare that.
Noted. Thanks, Deirdre. No problem. Noted. Agenda item 3, chairperson's business. And we do have, as I said, a very hefty schedule in terms of matters arising and correspondence. We may need to pause some of it while we take written evidence and possibly do some of it next week. But there's a written ministerial statement in the pack, page 6 of the meeting pack. That is the WMS, which was laid on Thursday, the 19th of December, regarding the draft executive budget for 25-26. I would suggest that we will have the opportunity to ask the main officials questions on that later on today, if members are content. The next agenda item, the next item of chairperson's business relates to written ministerial statement on the NI Consolidated Fund. So that's at page 4 of the tabled pack. And you will see that the Minister laid a WMS on a cash advance of just under 4 million to the Food Standards Agency. This was emailed to members. Once the 2025 budget bill has been passed and received royal assent, the advances will be repaid. This is to note that there's one further item of chairperson's business from me, which is in relation to a motion which was passed yesterday on gender responsive budgeting, and I think it would be helpful if members are content for us to ask for the department for a follow-up on actions arising for the minister and the department following the passage of that. Indeed, it was referenced by Philip Brett. If members are content, that we ask just for a follow-up from the department on any actions they're taking following
great,
that.
Thank you.
If members are content, we'll move on to agenda item 4, which is draft minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of December. That's page 23 of the meeting pack. If members are content, they're a true reflection of that meeting. I'll sign them. Content? Okay. Now we move on to matters arising, and we may have to park some of these. Yeah, at about 25 to 3, we may move on in order to get to our oral evidence, but we'll get through as much as we can. The first matter arising is from the Minister of Finance. It's correspondence relating to the adequacy of resources provided to the Departmental Solicitor's Office and the Office of Legislative Counsel. So this has come up on several occasions, particularly in relation to the registration-themed bills that we've been talking about here. OLC is part of the Executive Office, so the Minister suggested that we should contact First Legislative Counsel, who works under the Executive Office rather than the Department of Finance, for this information. In relation to DSO, the Minister has provided data which on resourcing that is expanded further in item 5.13, at item 5.13 at page 136 of our meeting pack, which sets out staff in post and vacancies in DSO, highlighting the overall increase in both legal and non-legal staff from 2013. The Minister also highlights that DSO is demand-led and has put in place both formal and informal demand management systems to enable it to efficiently deal with the department's business and meet changing and competing priorities. That's departments with the apostrophe at the end, because obviously DSO works for all departments, not just finance. So that's to note the correspondence. I think it's worth keeping the Deputy Chair was just come in, but I might just say before that, it's worth us keeping, if members are content, a watching brief and possibly corresponding with the Executive Office on OLC, because to remind people, DSO, sometimes we forget this, DSO effectively works through secondary legislation. OLC, which is part of TO, does primary legislation, so I think that's important too, because we're obviously scrutinising how much primary legislation comes through, and the specific thing we've been asking about in relation to the first marriages and the legislation is primary. but I'll bring in the
Yeah,
Vice
thank
Chair.
you, Chair. On the same sentiment, I think that the briefing section from DSO really made that clear. A lot of the concerns that were raised, Paul Frey in particular, raising around this bill and why is it not coming forward, and we were concerned about DSO and the resource, and so it made it very clear what their role was. And given that we do have concerns, and we still do have, at the rate at which legislation is reaching us in this committee and not getting onto the floor of the chamber, would the committee be minded to contact, as you say, the Executive Office or OLC there just directly to specifically reference the legislation in this committee, which we don't feel is that complicated, and is there any aspects
I
to
think
it?
it's totally reasonable for us to do that, both in relation to our specific legislation that we've been, as it were. So we have probably more, the registration legislation, fiscal council, and financial provisions are all in. So I think we're probably.
Which as well.
Yeah, exactly. So we in the marriage. So we have quite a number of bits of primary legislation that were promised in the legislation programme. I think it's reasonable for us to ask that question of the Executive Office about the OLC.
I think, Chair, that was the intention of us having DSO in the first place, because we were concerned about the delays in the legislation. So I think that that would be the proper follow-up.
Chair, if members are content, then we write through the Executive Office, and if members are also content, we'll ask for the same set of figures. So if we go back, they've given us 10 years. If we ask for the same for OLC, it allows a much better kind of understanding of just how it has grown or contracted or however it's worked. So if members are content, then, Chair, we can
Content,
go
yeah.
ahead and do that.
People are content. Okay. Next is cost of doing business. At 5.2, cost of doing business in Northern Ireland research. The Minister has commissioned research in relation to the cost of doing business in Northern Ireland. Terms of reference are included. It will be undertaken by the UU-EPC, the Economic Policy Centre, and the final report will be shared with the committee as the research is completed. One comment from me is that the terms of reference don't specifically reference rates at all. Now that may be included when it comes to taxation, but it would seem odd to me that you would do research on the cost of doing business in Northern Ireland and not ask about, now, it is also a locally levied tax, but it's a bit unusual because it's a significant cost burden. So I wonder if we could just clarify with the department that whether or not this will include rates. Deputy Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And again, on a similar sentiment, I wonder, should this be a joint research project between Department of Finance and Department of Economy in terms of the cost of doing business? I know I had flagged it with Philip Brett as Chair of the Economy Committee, because the finance-specific elements were missing, and it was the rates, but it's the cost of doing business, and a lot of these things are hitting and maybe informed through Department of Economy as well. So I don't know if that's something that we could maybe flag to make sure there's not a duplication.
Yeah, I think that's sensible. Members are content? Okay, that's that. The next agenda item relates to the Housing Executive and its ability to borrow funds. That's 5.3. So members, at page 48 of the meeting pack, you will see the Minister has replied to us in relation to discussions with the Chief Secretary to the Treasury around the Housing Executive's ability to borrow funds. The Minister is continuing to press the Chief Secretary for clarification in this regard and welcomes the committee's support in this matter. Basically, what they've said is that this goes back to the kind of central fiscal framework, ongoing discussions. I would suggest, given that we have, I think, the lead official, the team who are mostly responsible for those engagements later on today, if anybody wishes to raise that with them, we can ask them in oral evidence. 5.4 is response to the Infrastructure Committee regarding the NI water strike. Thankfully, that is largely moot because the strike was called off. Members are content with that. 5.5 is from the department relating to November outturn forecast and forecast to outturn. The committee has been sent the usual written briefing on outturn data, most helpfully, particularly after the deputy chair was pretty persistent at this point, and I think to all of our benefit. This data relates to November 24 forecast outturn return. Forecast outturn return represents the first return. It's easy for you to say, against the October monitoring outcome. Members will note the decrease of non-ring-fenced resource departmental over-commitments. Members previously agreed to seek an oral briefing on the first outturn and on the first outturn and forecast outturn following the October monitoring round. This has been scheduled for next week's meeting. At this time, the data for December will also be available, so we're going to get the data for next week. Yeah. And we'll have the officials, but I would also suggest we'll probably be able to ask the officials who are here today about it, because they will know. It is also in that outturn data, it reveals to us where the level of overcommitments are currently, which is just under 100 million. So we'll obviously have an opportunity to ask Joanne McBurney and Jeff McGuinness about that later if people are content? Does anyone want to come in on that? Okay.
About the action there as well.
Sorry, we do have an action, yes. So if members are agreed to note that briefing, obviously note it, but you can ask a question about it later, pending the oral briefing at next week's meeting, which is specifically about outturn data, and we will forward this to the other statutory committees and the audit committee, because obviously it's inherently linked to January monitoring.
Okay, thank you.
5.6 is response to the Economy Committee, is the Department's response to the Economy Committee on the impact of the Chancellor's budget statement. The Department of Finance has replied to the Economy Committee. The committee raised concerns to this committee, i.e. our committee, around the impact on businesses. The Department has provided a detailed response to the Economy Committee, highlighting work that is happening in the Department to address these concerns. Members may wish to note the reference to the Research Commission to examine how businesses will be impacted by wage and national insurance contribution rises. And obviously there was a motion on the Assembly on Monday on this. And there is ministerial correspondence, which we've already discussed about that. And also we'll also discussed the cost of doing business research. That is too brief, really to note at this stage, unless anybody wishes to raise it, Deputy Chair.
I just think that it echoes the point that I made earlier, that a lot of that correspondence is relating to the cost of doing business research paper that's been commissioned, and how it probably should be being looked at and doing it in partnership with Economy.
Yeah, I think that's
That clarification.
completely fair. People are content. Yeah, there is not a huge amount in there that I think moves us on beyond what's in, though there's lots of detail that particularly moves us on beyond where we already knew we were. But in any case, so that's to note this response at this point. Now, members, the Department has requested that details for the information of the next agenda item are discussed in closed session, because there's just a degree, they say, of commercial sensitivity. So if members are content, we'll move in briefly into closed session for initial consideration.
Senate Chamber. Sound. 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 Senate Chamber. Sound.
More detail about the process that was followed to ensure that there is best value has been achieved. Are we still? Am I okay to?
We're good.
We're good. Okay.
Chair, yeah.
So we are going to ensure that we're doing that we got best value in the appropriate way. The second item we discussed in closed session relates to the management of the Northern Ireland Investment Fund, which we have discussed at some length before. The Northern Ireland Investment Fund is an investment fund which has largely been used to make. It's supposed to be used to make all sorts of potentially transformative investments with social value and environmental value and low carbon transition. It has largely been used to make investments which one might argue, or someone might argue, may have happened anyway. But in any case, having seen what we've seen in closed session, we are going to ask for further information about decisions which have been made in terms of how advice has been sought and that fund has been managed, with a view to potentially having an evidence session and looking at the terms of reference for that fund. So if all are agreed, we will move on. We're now going to jump a little bit ahead, members. We may have further matters arising we come back to. We're going to jump ahead to briefly agenda item 6 and SL1, which we'll do hopefully relatively quickly, and then we will have an oral evidence session. So agenda item 6 is SL1 on the recognition of professional qualifications and the implementation of international recognition agreements, extension to Switzerland, etc. Regulations Northern Ireland 2025. So members, that's at page 89, 91 and 100 of the table pack. The clerk's memo and relevant correspondence from the department are there. As noted during the meeting on the 11th of December, the department needs to bring forward legislative amendments to give effect to a UK-Swiss agreement on the recognition of professional qualifications. The department has responsibility for the regulation of the legal profession. However, this is undertaken on a practical level by the Law Society and Bar Council. Members also noted that the Minister for Finance needs to bring forward legislation to ensure the agreement works effectively for the legal profession in Northern Ireland. This will be in the form of a statutory rule. Therefore, the department has now formally informed the committee that it intends to bring forward a statutory rule under powers conferred by the Professional Qualifications Act 2022. The rule will be subject to an affirmative resolution procedure. Full details can be found in correspondence from the department. One comment I wish to make before I ask members about this is that it, to me, reinforces again the somewhat surreal position that the Department of Finance is doing this. This relates to mutual recognition of professional qualifications for lawyers in Northern Ireland and the UK as a whole, and in Switzerland. It's a good thing to the extent that it creates new professional opportunities for them, but it should be out with the core priorities of this committee and the Department of Finance. It should be done, in my view, but I'm just expressing a personal view here, by the Department of Justice, as it would be in most other jurisdictions. But that's just my view. I'll ask any other members if they wish to comment on it.
No.
No. If members are content with the proposed statutory rule under powers conferred by the Professional Qualifications Act 2022 to implement the recognition of professional qualifications and implementation of the international recognition agreements, or if anybody would require any further information. No? Okay. Agreed. Thank you. The next agenda item is SR 2024-2017, the Government Resources and Accounts Northern Ireland Act 2001, GRANI for short, brackets estimate and accounts designation of bodies, Amendment Order 2024. Members, at page 188 of the meeting pack, there's a clerk's cover note and relevant papers. At the meeting on the 11th of December, the committee agreed that whilst it was content with a proposed statutory rule to designate specified government bodies in relation to named government departments for the purposes of those departments' supply estimates and resource accounts, This was subject to the officials attending today's meeting to provide further explanation around the required timing for the introduction of the SR, implications for other legislation, and when the legislation will come into force. The rule has now been formally laid and is subject to negative resolution procedure before the Assembly. The Department have stated that there have been no changes to policy content since the SL1 was submitted to the committee. Full details of the background to the rule can be found in the correspondence from the Department and cover notes starting at page 189 of the meeting pack. The end of the statutory period for this SR is 11th of February 2025. So we welcome to the meeting Patrick Neeson, who's Assistant Secretary from Public Spending Directorate, Angela Ross, Supply Officer. Angela's not with us, but Emma Jane Hunter is, who's Deputy Principal in the same Directorate, and we'd invite you to make a brief opening statement. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So just thanks for the opportunity just to brief the committee today and answer any questions you may have. I'll just give a little bit of background in terms of why the SR is required. So following the review of financial processes, in April 22, Department of Finance is required to prepare a statutory rule each financial year to designate bodies to departmental estimates and accounts. So the SR must come into operation before the main estimates for that financial year are laid. A further SR may be needed, and that's what we're talking about here, prior to completing SSEs, and that's if there's been any change, no matter how minor, to the list of designated bodies associated with the earlier main estimates. So in terms of the main estimates for 24-25, at your committee meeting on the 15th of May 24, you approved the progress of the SR in relation to the designation of bodies of order, which was laid on the 16th of May 24, came into operation on 6th of June 24, so that was in terms of the main estimates. So for SSEs 24-25, so the process of commissioning SSEs began in early October. So timing is important in terms of this SR. So we need to leave it as late as we can to pick up on any changes to the names of bodies, but we can't leave it so late that the SR isn't made and laid before SSEs are laid. So following that engagement with departments around SSEs, there were several minor amendments to the list of bodies in the order identified. So one was removed in terms of the Department of Finance. There was a minor change to a body in terms of the Department for Economy, and 4 minor changes to bodies under TEO. So amendment order was required to reflect these changes. So as you know, we put forward a proposal, was submitted to the committee for consideration at the 11th of December meeting, seeking approval to proceed with this SR ahead of recess. And as you've said, committee members were content, subject to officials coming back to provide further information and clarification. So DOF laid the statutory rule on the 16th of December. At the time, we felt that that committee meeting of the 11th of December would have been the last opportunity for the committee to approve, because the next meeting wasn't until now, and that would have been too late for the amendment order to come into operation. So as you know, there's a 21-day rule applies to SRs subject to negative resolution, have to allow the minimum of 21 calendar days to elapse between the date in which the SR is laid before the Assembly and it coming into force. So in this case, the designation of bodies order must come into operation prior to the SSE's been laid, and that was the rationale for seeking the committee's agreement on the 11th of December. So we're planning to lay the 24-25 SSEs, the 25-26 vote on account, statement of excesses in February. Now the date at which that's happened determines when January monitoring is agreed by the Executive. So obviously it's a very tight window then for the team in the department to complete the whole SSA process, the legislative process, get royal assent for the budget bill to be achieved, and that all has to happen before sometime around the end of March. So as you appreciate, there's a lot to do. We try to prepare what we can in advance to allow us to focus on the SSEs once the Executive has agreed January monitoring outcomes. But to ensure the amendment order reflects, as I've said, the most up-to-date provision prior to laying the SSEs, we need to wait as close as possible to the line of the SSEs to introduce the statutory rule. So if we were to do it earlier, that presents a bit of a risk. So should a new body be identified in the intervening period between the order being made and the SSE's been laid, and is not included in the amendment order, then, and it's, with no legal basis in which to pay from the consolidated fund to that body. So that's the risk of doing it earlier. So moving forward, what we intend to do for the main estimates 25-26 is for that designation of bodies order, we're planning to do it this year from the start of the new financial year, so that will be well in time for the main estimates process, and that aligns with what Treasury do actually. So that would require the order to be made on the 11th of March to have 21 days before it comes into operation. So we've liaised with Dallo in relation to that, and we've asked that that's included on the Finance Committee's agenda, I think in the 19th of February meeting. So that would give the committee 2 weeks to scrutinise that order before the DOF need to lay on the 11th of March. So that's what we're planning to do in terms of main estimates. Moving forward also then in terms of SSEs, I think our intention would be that aim to give the committee more time, to scrutinise and balancing against that risk that I mentioned, that there's always a danger that if you do it too soon, you miss out on a body whose name changes and then it's not captured in the SSEs. But I think what we do is aim to bring that forward, where we can, and just make ourselves available as officials on the day, again, to answer any questions.
Yeah.
So, we think it's a fairly routine matter. Typically it picks up minor changes, but happy to take any questions.
First of all, thank you for appearing. I probably think we're being right thran so-and-sos for dragging you up in front of the committee, but obviously our job is to be that, yes. Well, but also to ensure that we're completely we've satisfied ourselves that we understand what we're signing off on, but also the public has comments. Just so people are aware, the quickest way is to look. The quickest thing to get the summary of what is the Annex A, which is on page 205, which summarises the changes from the 2024 order, and there are only 3 departments, I think, that are touched upon: Department of Finance, the Procurement Board. There's 4 bodies having their name changed that are under TO, and 1 DFE, which is the Construction Industry Training Board. Just to summarise, those 6 slight name changes are the sum total of what is happening in this piece of legislation.
Yeah.
Okay. Are there any other questions from members? Diane, sorry, the Deputy Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you both for being here to discuss this. I fully appreciate, how accuracy, keeping it up to date, and turning this around is critical here. And I don't think in any way the committee's asking for more time for us to go through this or hold it up in any way. It's just simply that whenever it's sent through, it would be good to have a little bit more information. So whenever it's come through saying here are the changes, obviously our responsibility is to say what's changing, why, and has it been approved by each of those departments. So that's our responsibility to ask that back. So even just a note or a letter from someone in, for example, DOF is yourselves, so we can appreciate that that's been communicated. But for us, some sort of communication behind this from somebody in TEO to say, yep, we confirm these are the name changes, a bit of evidence from somebody in DFE. So whenever we're putting this legislation through to say these names are changing in these 3 bodies, if they went through and somewhere down the line a query came back, as Finance Committee, we've approved that without seeing just a little bit more information. So I just think just one extra tier of information is all we're requiring. We're not asking for any longer or anything on this.
I suppose, of these changes, it's really the departments themselves that have come in and asked us to change it. So it's really changes coming from the departments. It's not really changes, I suppose, DOF have proposed. So yes, that's no problem. We'll do that going forward.
No, thank you, because you fully appreciate what it is. So if the communication's there, if that's able to come in some sort of proposal form or agreed form to this committee whenever this standard legislation's coming through each time, I think that it would just be complete and allows us to be able to tick the box that we understand why and are clear on it, and that governance has been followed.
Yep. Any other questions? Paul, through.
Yeah, thank you. How many times in recent history has this problem occurred where you have enacted the order and then the next day somebody has changed their name before the budget's been passed?
Well, this was only actually introduced from April 2022. Okay. So it hasn't happened, but there is always, as I say, a risk that it could happen.
And so why was it only enacted from 2022? What did we do before that?
Although the review of financial processes, it was an outcome of that.
It was what?
We're on the committee, Paul. You and I were on the committee that scrutinised it.
Yeah. So explain to me this again.
It was an outcome of the review of financial processes whereby the other bodies are consolidated now in departmental kind of estimates, so we have to reflect changes to all bodies'
Right, okay.
names, so that's why it only happened then.
ROFP, it wasn't required, it wasn't a requirement, so it's only really just come in from the 1st of April 2022.
So now that we've had this change, and with the time pressure you guys are under, and the reason why you hold off is to catch all the name changes, you enact this order now. You said 11th of March?
There is one every year.
One every
So
year.
before, there's a main order, and there will be an amendment order required if there is any changes to that main order. So every year we'll have to lay this particular statutory rule to designate all the bodies,
Which is the main order.
which is the main order.
And then the very next day, what happens if someone changes their name?
Well, then we will pick that up whenever we do the
With this
amendment
one.
order before we lay the SSEs.
Right, okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Intent. So I suppose as well as falling off your Christmas card list for 2025, we have hopefully demonstrated that we are keen to be as tediously scrupulous as we can be in terms of understanding what's before of us. And so, though sometimes it's overburdening for the clerks, more is more for us, because we do want to ensure that we're understanding it correctly, particularly having been down for so much of the last few years. Thank you very much for your time. And now that we know that the People's Front of Judea is being renamed the Judean People's Front for the purposes of the accounts for this year, and that's not going to cause any difficulties, that's most helpful. Thank you very much,
We change your
Patrick
name
and
when it
Jane, for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, folks, now the next agenda item is if we could seek agreement that, I don't think we have anything coming out of that, do we? Do we agree?
Do you want to just...
Yes, of course. Sorry, I should just do that. We're content with the statutory rule. We can go back just for the purposes of the record. Now that we've had that briefing and we understand, and people have seen the annex, say the precise name changes that are happening. If people are content with statutory rule, subject as always to the report from the statutory examiner, I will put the question that the Committee for Finance has considered SR 217/2024, the Government Resources and Accounts Northern Ireland Act 2001, Estimates and Accounts Designation of Bodies Amendment Order 2024, and subject to the examiner's report, has no objection to the rule. Agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Now, we are going to move on to... have we ever...
An informal view from the examiner.
Yeah,
We do have an informal record.
we have an informal view that there won't be an issue raised, but obviously we always wait until we get the final report through. So members are agreeing this on the basis of a statutory examiner statutory rules report. However, she has indicated that she is minded, that she is content.
Fine. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you for that. Now, members, we move on to the next agenda item, which is oral evidence, possibly the most meaty bit of today's session. Oral evidence from the Department on the Budget Sustainability Plan, but also the draft budget 2025-26. That constitutes agenda items 8 and 9. There are various bits in the pack for people to go through. First is the written ministerial statement on the Budget Sustainability Plan, which I guess dates from October. Second is the WMS and the Draft Executive Budget 25-26. 3 is the Draft Executive Budget Fact Sheet at page 294. The Cumulative Equality Impact Assessment at page 303. The Departmental Briefing Paper, which has the latest position on 25-26, and the work on budget sustainability. That's page 103 of the table pack, and the Departmental Briefing Paper on the January monitoring position, which is page 113 of the table pack. So lots to discuss, and thank you very much to Joanne McBurney, who's Budget Director, Jeff McGuinness, who's Head of Budget Sustainability, and Mary Ann Smith, Head of Central Expenditure. And thank you all very much, as always, for coming. Just invite, first of all, Happy New Year to the team, and we'd invite Joanne or Jeff to make an opening statement. Obviously, we're two broad themes, so feel free to take it in turns. I don't think today we will, folks, sequence our questions because we don't have a huge guest list in terms of, we have a guest list, but we don't have a huge cast list in terms of MLA committee participants. So I won't break up the committee, I won't break up our questions into two different themes. I'll just kind of mix and match as we go. So please do make either one or more opening statements.
No, thank you very much, Chair, for the opportunity to come and brief you. No issue with not breaking up your questions. We'll just field them between us as we'll see. So I have a few opening remarks as usual. I'll try and keep them quite brief. So as the committee is aware, the Executive agreed draft budget 25-26 on the 19th of December. While the Executive did receive additional funding from the autumn budget, there is no doubt that we are still facing an incredibly challenging financial situation. As is usual, the bids for both resource and capital far outweigh the funding available. I won't go through all of the allocations in an effort to keep my opening remarks succinct, but in summary, the draft budget provides $8.4 billion for health and social care, which is 50.6% of the total departmental resource allocations. It's an increase of $642.5 million, or 8.3%, against the budget 24-25, and that equates to £4,380 per head being spent on health. Budget provides $3.2 billion for education for day-to-day spending, an increase of $344.6 million, or 12%, against budget 24-25, equating to £1,678 per head being spent in education. It doubles the funding for the childcare strategy, providing $50 million for this. It funds actions to make communities safer, including particular focus on ending violence against women and girls. It ring-fences $332.5 million of funding for agriculture, agri-environment and fisheries and rural development, and it focuses efforts on growing the economy by investing in skills. $100 million capital funding is being provided to deliver safe, secure and affordable housing, while $105.7 million is being provided for NI Water, recognising the importance of our wastewater infrastructure. The draft budget has been viewed through the lens of the draft programme for government as far as possible, but this has been limited given to the need to maintain existing services. However, there are earmarked allocations for childcare, skills, social housing, just transition and violence against women and girls. In other areas, while the funding has not been specifically earmarked in order to provide flexibility in managing budget pressures, the allocations to health, education, justice and economy should contribute to PFG priorities in these areas. Further work will be necessary to align PFG priorities with budgets going forward, and this will be taken forward through the work in the Budget Improvement Plan. In parallel, ongoing work on budget sustainability will focus on ensuring better transparency, developing long-term plans for departments and putting in place the building blocks for fiscal sustainability. Departments will now consider how best to deliver their priorities within the funding envelopes which this draft budget provides. A vital part of this is the consultation carried out by individual departments in line with their equality schemes. The Department of Finance launched an overarching 12-week consultation on the 19th of December. This is alongside departmental consultations will be used to inform final budget. I touched briefly on the work of the Budget Sustainability Team, and I understand that the committee are keen to discuss the Budget Sustainability Plan annexes relating to potential income generation. As the committee will be aware, the interim fiscal framework included a commitment by the Executive to raise at least $113 million more income by 25-26. Given the limited fiscal levers available to the Executive, this target is to be assessed over 2 years, effectively evaluating how much additional income is raised in 25-26 compared to 23-24. The Budget Sustainability Plan set out an initial forecast of $145.9 million against the target of $113 million. When it comes to income generation, it's worth noting that the Finance Minister has always been clear in saying income generation should be set as a component of effective delivery of public services rather than set to deal with a Treasury target. We have recently engaged with departments on income generation measures, and currently there are only a few measures that are forecasting changes to the level of expected savings. Overall, the latest forecast income generation is set to be approximately $17 million above the $113 million target. The difference from the October Sustainability Plan publication is predominantly related to the latest rates assessments, which are now based on the draft budget assumptions of 5% and 3% domestic and non-domestic rates. Jeff can provide more detail on this later on in the session. I'm happy to take questions on either the budget or the budget sustainability work.
Excellent, thank you very much. I suppose first of all from me, we earlier on in our session discussed the latest outturn data. It appears the position for 24-25 is currently at £90 million or 100 million, between 90 and just under £100 million over commitment. Are you confident that that will be resolved in January monitoring?
I suppose two things. We'll have another forecast outturn analysis with the committee hopefully this week to inform next week's session. I don't have the actual figures in front of me here, but that will see that 90 million reduce somewhat. From memory, I think we're left with sort of health and education showing pressures. The Executive should be considering the January monitoring round shortly. I don't think there will be enough to address the pressures in full, so it will leave departments with challenges, but I would at this point be relatively confident that each department should be able to manage to live within the budget that's set after the January monitoring round, albeit that might mean difficult decisions have to be taken.
When you say difficult decisions being taken, does that mean reprofiling certain bits of spending into the next financial year, or does it mean massively scaling down services and laying people off?
I wouldn't think it would result in the latter. It'll be for each, obviously, department to decide how best to manage it. I think for most departments it will come down to choices, unfortunately, around pay and how far they can go in relation to pay awards. I think that's going to be facing some people. There may be some slippage which allows them to push pressures into next year, but we're, say, relatively confident that we will come in within target. The consequences, as I've said many times before, of doing that are too severe not to, with 559 becoming repayable and any overspend coming off next year, and the budget has shown that 25-26 is already a challenging position for us.
So 25-26 is a challenging position. Do you have an estimate of your level of, you don't know pressures because you don't know, you haven't got return, we haven't got into the new financial year yet, but do you have a sense of where the pressures are going to be in 25-26?
Well, I think every department would say that the draft budget outcome has not given them everything that they would like. I think that's probably fair enough to say. I don't think at this stage we should be going down the lines of overcommitments with departments, because I think the 25-26 position is much better than the opening 24-25 budget. I don't think we can expect the same level of Barnett consequentials to come in year. We would expect some, but nowhere near the same amount we got in 24-25. So I think by setting a budget before the start of the financial year, each department will have to take action to manage to live within that budget. There can't be that same level of over-planning or over-commitment and the assumption that funding will come later. There will have to be action taken to live within the budget that's
Do you think that happened this past financial year? Do you think people thought that, well, there's a new UK government, they're going to be a bit less constrained in spending terms, so we can afford to be a bit more loose and overcommit a bit more?
I think the position at the start of 24-25 was so difficult, and I think there was also probably a recognition that Whitehall departments were also facing pressures, that there was an assumption. It wasn't, I don't suppose, around the, necessarily a new government or whatever, but I think departments here talk to their counterparts in Whitehall. I think they knew that everybody was facing pressures and that there would likely be funding coming down the line.
Now, there's been lots of coverage, obviously, in the last couple of weeks about things like the spike in gilt yields and cost of UK borrowing and what that's going to mean in terms of Whitehall spending, and reports of the Treasury telling other departments that spending is going to be constrained further, perhaps in the spring budget. Have you had any specific communication about what that will mean for the block grant?
No, we have no specific communication what that would mean, and Treasury will not share anything in advance of their spending review outcome. But other than to say, we read the news as well, and we do raise these things with Treasury, and they would say the same, that the position is incredibly tight and will be constrained. So I don't think we can expect the same levels of increase in the next phase of the spending review as we received in this one. So I think the position is not going to be.
It's fair to say that the executive got, notwithstanding, there were a couple of very unwelcome things that happened around city deals. What happened last summer was more than the executive was expecting.
Yeah,
we're in the unusual position of having slightly more than was expected.
I think that the level of in-year funding last year was unprecedented, certainly. And I don't think we could expect the same level of in-year increases going forward. It was effectively, the Chancellor's Autumn Budget was effectively a reset of Whitehall Department's budgets, and that is then what has been factored into ours. Now, we have other issues, obviously, with the end of the financial package, and there's ongoing negotiations with Treasury on what happens with that, and as we move forward, and the implementation of the interim fiscal framework, etc. But I don't think we could expect anywhere near the same level of in-year Barnett consequences.
I suppose from the public out there, they hear lots of talk about the pressures, and there clearly are pressures on the executive budget, but they also are being told that this is an unprecedented, in one sense, an unprecedented in-year uplift for the executive budget. So I think there's a bit of a, well, it's not necessarily a contradiction coming from you, but there's a contradiction there in terms of, I think, the overall messaging for the public. And I think that moves us on to the budget sustainability plan and what's happening with the budget, what's happening with that. Is part of the budget sustainability plan about looking at getting to a position where health is not taking up, is it 50.6, did you say?
50.6 at the minute. If I can come in just with Jeff, will talk about the good work his team is doing on that. It's important to recognise when we're talking about the in-year allocations in 24-25, our 25-26 budget is higher than our 24-25 budget. So although we're saying we won't get the same level of in-year allocations, our starting point is a little bit higher than that. So I think that's an important point to make. But Jeff, I mean, there is lots of work to be done on budget sustainability, and Jeff, you'll want to say
so just on that point, it is true to say that the executive has a bigger budget than it expected to have. Like if you go back to leave aside the restoration package, the baseline level of executive funding is now higher than they would have expected. As I say, out with the restoration package, the baseline level of executive funding is higher than they anticipated back at the start of 2024.
It is, though I think that is in recognition of the level of pressures that everywhere is facing at the minute. So it is higher than would have normally, if you'd looked at the way they normally calculate baselines, yes, it's absolutely higher. But I think that has to be a recognition of the pressures we're facing. But as I say, I'll let Jeff talk about the budget sustainability work.
Sure. In terms of our budget sustainability work, we have obviously two strands to that. The budget improvement plan, which we've provided you with the roadmap and a number of kind of key areas in there where we're developing and improving the budget process itself, trying to understand where stakeholders are coming from and to develop the budget in a way that helps to provide additional information or better information for the public, stakeholders and anybody else who's engaged in the budget process. The second element of that will be our longer term departmental plans. So we're working with departments on 5-year departmental plans and trying to allowing departments to get all the information that they have in terms of their strategic direction, in terms of their workforce planning, in terms of their efficiency and their transformation agendas, and compiling all of that information to produce a set of 5-year departmental plans which will effectively tell the bigger picture of each department. We probably have a lot of sound bites from departments around maybe what's happening on their transformation programme or what's happening on specific pressures, but these will try and corral all of the issues within departments so that we have a strategic picture of each department for the next 5 years. We're planning to commission that with departments shortly. We're doing a roadmap or a pilot project within DOF on that, and we're engaging with departments around the lessons that we've been learning within DOF on that, and we will be looking for departments to have those in place probably the September time this year. That kind of correlates with this spending review.
And what will that document be called? Sorry, that's an update.
Those are 5-year departmental plans. So
5-year departmental plans, okay.
Yeah.
And that's not 5-year budgets, that's 5-year kind of thematic, what you are planning to do in budget terms?
Yeah, so it's essentially, it will be, for departments, if you do nothing from now on, what will your costs look like over 5 years? We'll also put in there a rough projection of what a budget might look like for them, but really at a high level in Northern Ireland, percentage level rather than specific budgets for departments. But that will give you an idea of the gap between what pressures departments are facing and what budget they may reasonably expect to get, and then it will be for then departments to kind of to start to understand how do we close that gap.
Now, just on the budget sustainability plan is lots of interesting intent, I would say, around how things might be managed differently or better, and then an annex table which says this is how we get to 113 or a bit more than 113, 140 odd, I think you said, so slightly above the target. But it's true to say, so am I to understand now that I'm just trying to get to the actual table, the table in the budget sustainability plan, which is at Appendix D, the detailed tables of
270.
Of page 270, exactly. This is page 270 for anybody who wants to go to it in our pack. Those detailed tables, are they now a policy? Are those all definitely going to happen?
The 24-25 position is all pretty much baked in, and we have asked departments for updates, and they are still on track for those, with a couple of exceptions and marginal at the edges. 25-26 are either policy or current intent, but ministers haven't yet made decisions, but we're confident that we will meet that particular 113 million target, regardless of whether a minister decides on 4% or 3% in some of those areas.
So, but in broad terms, so 'cause one of the last times I think we heard from you, Appendix D was still effectively suggest, and for the purposes of people watching outside, Appendix D is a list of revenue raising options which range from this year's regional rate increase down to things like increasing regulatory income charges, basically from ordnance survey charges and AFB charges on presumably animal health, things like that. Now, lots of those are simply operating with inflation. Was the Treasury official not wise enough to say to you, you can't include simply increasing by inflation costs, things that would otherwise be operated with inflation in your 113 million calculations?
I mean, in terms of
it's a bit daft of them not to have thought of that, no?
Treasury's view was you need to raise 113 million of additional revenue than you did in 23-24, and that's exactly what we're doing.
They didn't say, and they weren't wise enough to say it can't just be inflationary increases in commercial charges.
I'm not going to make a view on the wisdom of Treasury on this one.
Well, in any case, there are certain things here which I think are slightly bizarre. For example, one of the things that is scored as a revenue-raising decision is not proceeding with the free hospital car parking charges bill, which is a bit surreal. That, I think, is an extra 6 million of income versus a baseline, which is presumably factoring in the implementation of that bill. I think people find that a bit strange. Anyway, I've asked enough questions. We're going to bring in colleagues now. Dan Forsyth, first of all.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for coming back in 2025. Great to see you. Thanks very much for the latest outturn figures. I know last time you were here you were saying wait until you've got the November ones to get the full picture, and I think that the format of them again is very, very useful. We can see that the £97 million of overcommitments, and we can also see the set out plan as to how each department is aiming to hit break even. So I think that gives a bit of reassurance that at least it is in people's minds that they need to take further steps. I was wondering in terms of that, so that was obviously November figures. In terms of timing, have you had sight of the December to see is it getting any better?
They are just in, and the team are working with them, and we hope to get those with you shortly. They are, from memory, very slightly better. The only thing I would add, and maybe quite cynically, is that they would have been provided before the January monitoring round, so departments would still want to highlight that they have pressures because they'll be bidding for funding in January. So I suppose it's the really true one. I'm sorry, I appear to keep saying this to you, look for the next one, but after the January monitoring, that will show the position for the year. But I think that it will come down slightly, and I think while there's still challenging decisions for departments, I think we're in a better place certainly than we were.
No, excellent. And I remember last year you had said because of the terms around our financial package here, you weren't able to move between last financial year and this financial year unspent amount of money. Does the financial package restrict that same way this March?
No, we have our normal carry forward. Now, it's still at a restricted level. The budget exchange scheme is based on a percentage of our final plan, but we are able to carry funding forward. So there won't be the same pressure to make sure that we keep those underspends as close to zero as possible.
Okay, thank you very much. And on the budget 25-26, obviously a big thing coming down the line is the increase in the employers' national insurance contributions. And I can see obviously a line referring to, the departments and that, but we know that the impact is so much wider once you take into account arm's length bodies and also the voluntary community sector on that. Has there been an assessment in terms of the budget and potential reduction in public services as to the entire cost of this on departments, arm's length bodies, voluntary community sector, and have we an idea of how much that's going to look like, that increased cost to our delivery of public services here?
We don't have an overall figure. We have engaged with departments, and the departments are sort of saying, for the central government bodies, it's around 200 million, possibly slightly more. Now, that is just those sort of departments and their arm's length bodies, which are treated as being central government. You'll know that Treasury have said, the Chancellor did say, there would be support for those sort of public sector bodies. We don't have a figure for what that support will be yet. It's likely to cover sort of Whitehall departments and support provided to local government in GB. Our initial assessment is that it will not cover the 200 million. And on top of that 200 million, councils here are estimating, I think it's about just over 12 million of pressures that they have. And then, as you say rightly, you have the impact on businesses and on the community and voluntary sector who do deliver a lot of services on our behalf, and that hasn't been captured yet. I think there's maybe an ongoing body of work to do that. The difficulty for the executive will be that we won't receive the funding from the Treasury to compensate for that, so it will result in overall in a pressure for us to deal with.
And have you any idea when you would get any sort of indication from Treasury as to how much they're going to provide towards this?
I would hope we would get it before the start of the financial year, but I'll turn to Marianne. I don't think they've given us a timeline for that. It's one of those things that we ask them every time we're talking to them when we're going to get those numbers. But it should be in advance of the start of the financial year, I would hope, or very early in the financial year.
Yeah, thank you. And just a final one from me, just in terms of the table that was referred to in the budget sustainability plan, where we're referring to the increase of rates creating an extra £43.2 million. Is that the value of the bills, or does that build into it an element of non-collection of rates or write-offs?
Do you want to answer that, or do you want me to? I suppose I do. The way because we do resource-based budgeting, the way the regional rates figures are factored into our budget plans is on an accruals basis, so it's bills, but we do have a provision for bad debt in there.
Okay.
So the 42 is the additional income that would come in, but within our overall rates figure, we have a provision in there for bad debt, so debts written off or debts that we don't think we'll collect. It wouldn't necessarily be the same as outstanding debtors, because obviously we're still working to collect those, but it is factored in that way.
Oh, well, that's good to know, because we know the high level of uncollected debts in terms of rates and the write-offs, and I wouldn't want to see that hit the results in the sustainability plan, so it's good to see that's factored in there. But just to conclude on that point, have you any estimation of what the shortfall will be for 24-25 in terms of rates collection or estimated write-off?
No,
not in terms of the cash, and we wouldn't look at the cash. We will look at that. What is the bad debt provision at the end of that, and what is the overall bills? We'll get that when we get to, we'll factor something in January monitoring, and I think the overall figure may be down slightly on what we had in October monitoring, and then we'll get the actual figure when we do a provisional outturn in May.
Thank you very much. Thanks,
Jerry Carroll's next. Jerry.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the presentation. In terms of the budget and the economic sort of strategy more generally, I mean, I wondered if there's been any rethink in the department. I mean, given there's been a deluge of attacks on the Chancellor, somewhat warranted, in some cases very warranted, some cases less so, but really about our economic strategy. And for me and many people, it's kind of it's almost carbon copy of what the Tories have done. Cut public services, not invest in working class people or communities as well. So I wonder if there's been any rethink, considering there's been a lot of pressure put on the Chancellor, and also I'm curious as to how robustly are they challenged in meetings by officials, by the Minister, because I don't know whether that's always the case. We're told that there's a strong case put forward in many instances. I don't doubt that, but I just want to know how robust the challenges are and how often they would kind of take place.
Well, I suppose take it first thing to realise is that our influence over the Treasury's economic policy is extremely limited, and that's probably exaggerating it. The Treasury will make their own decisions on those things, but in saying that, our Minister, on every occasion where she has met with Treasury, and in every letter she urges for more funding to be put to public services, not just more funding for the executive, but more funding for public services generally, because it is that if there's properly funded public services in England, then the executive benefits from that through the Whitehall departments, and she has been very robust in that, and in every occasion where she has met with them or been writing to them, she continues to press for that more funding in public services.
Okay, I think you're talking down your position, saying influence in Treasury is limited. Appreciate only so much can be achieved in a meeting, but I think these need to be challenged. I mean, the Treasury approach to economics is completely short-sighted on their funds, public services. As you said, Joanne, in England, more so, just as much in England and the north of Ireland. So I think there needs to be a more robust challenge to them. So just to make that point. In terms of health, I mean, obviously, just before the meeting started, we got correspondence from the Health Minister, so I appreciate you may not have seen it. But as a general point, obviously, he's making the case about underfunding in health. Now, obviously, not here to bat for him, but concern about the health service and funding generally. I mean, he said that the £200 million in savings that he's been told to make, again, for the second year in a row, will put people at considerable risk, and that's a quote from his statement. I mean, that's very, very concerning. We've seen already EDs running to the ground, people overworked, and the crisis, it's every winter, but it seems to be increasing in severity. So, I mean, what is the department's view on that? He's also stated that this is in 10 years, this is the lowest spend on health in the North. I mean, this is a part of this budget process. So I have real issues. In part, that's the reason why I voted against it. But I want to ask for the department's view on that point as well.
Okay. So nobody is underestimating the pressures facing the health service, but I think the other side of that equation is the executive does have a finite pot of money available to allocate, and the funding that goes on one service is less funding for another. Haven't had a chance to look at the health minister's statement in any great detail. What I would say is that excluding earmarked funding, the Department for Health 25-26 budget outcome is 200 million higher than the October monitoring position. Now, as I've said many times before, you don't necessarily compare an in-year position with an opening budget because there still is the potential for additional money in year. And although I've said that the Barnett funding we expect to get next year will be lower, we will still get something. I would imagine there will still be in-year allocations. It's for the Health Minister to decide how that funding is allocated to his own priorities. One of the important things to also realise is that if you're comparing 25-26 with 24-25, you also need to take account of the significant funding that went into the Department for Health prior to that. Since budget 2020-21, the health baseline resource DEL funding has increased by over 2.6 billion, or 45.7%. The equivalent figure for the total of departments is 38.8%. So we have put more funding into health in that period, and there is a limit to what we can do. The Health Minister, I think, in his statement did say, mention a 400 million funding gap. If we were to have provided that 400 million to health, it would have left every other department much lower than their October monitoring outturn. So those are the challenges facing the executive, is if you prioritise one area, you deprioritise another. I don't think there's any department out there would say that it got the funding in this budget that it needed to do everything it could. It just comes down to trying to prioritise that funding as best as we can.
Okay, I think it goes back to the original point about really challenging the Treasury approach to economics, which, I think it isn't. I don't know to what extent that is being challenged, but I take your point. But I think those figures are disputed by the health figures by the minister and others. Final question, just on the childcare strategy. Obviously, 50 million has been allocated, which represents, I think, 12.5% of the needed 400 million pounds for a childcare strategy, and this is obviously a supposed priority of the executive. So many people will be saying, if it's a priority, then obviously why isn't that funded adequately? So, can you maybe, Joanne, I think you've said this in a previous meeting, but indicate what work is being done to make that 400 million pound figure for a proper strategy that everybody can avail of?
I'm not completely aware, I will be honest, not completely over the detail of the childcare strategy. The 50 million we've set aside in budget 25-26 is double the amount that was in 24-25. And I suppose it's back to my original point. The funding has been set aside for the childcare strategy. It's double what was in 24-25. The executive has a finite pot of funding. It's funded through a formula, not through any negotiations with Treasury. Within that finite pot of funding, the executive has to decide what to prioritise. And in my view, it did prioritise childcare by putting that 50 million aside. Is it as much as we would all want to do? No, but it is there, it is prioritised. And if we give more money for that, the question is, where do we take the money from?
I disagree, that's a priority, but maybe we can, Okay, thanks.
Okay, Deirdre Hargey.
Yeah, and thanks very much for the presentation. Joanne, you had mentioned, I think, in the opening around that despite the additional money in the autumn budget, we're still dealing with a very challenging budget moving forward. And obviously, national insurance contributions is one part of that. I'm just wondering what other challenges you see coming into the next year that's going to have. My other question, I suppose, is around the 5-year departmental plans. I think it is important that we're doing that. But for me, it's around, because all departments are going to forever and a day present with increased pressures year on year. We know that, whether you're looking at justice or health or education, the complexity of work is increasing as well. and that adds to the pressure in terms of how public services deal with those complexities. So as part of the budget sustainability, but also the transformation bids that are coming forward as well, is there a drive in terms of how we're assessing those plans against outcomes that we want to see at the other end? So not just about meeting the programme for government priorities, but how we're starting to change outcomes that start to address some of those departmental pressures and some of those complexities that we're seeing right across our public services. So I just want to, is there more detail that can be given? And I suppose in the process that you are doing now, I know that the plans are going to be forthcoming later in the year. I think Jeff said to kind of align to the comprehensive spending review. Do we know at what part of the year that's going to come in? And also, is there a date yet in terms of the next phase of the transformation bids as well? Thanks.
Okay, there's a lot there. I'm not sure I'll cover all of it, but I'll try my best. You're absolutely right. The national insurance is causing a pressure for us, and the uncertainty around that is also not helpful, and it's the pressure over the wider sectors, not just departments, and that's something we have to deal with. As you've said, all departments are facing significant pressures, and I think everybody would say that they would need more funding. What they do, there's inflationary pressures, there's continuing pressures to make sure that our public sector workers are appropriately rewarded with appropriate pay deals, and that adds pressures, financial pressures to that. Jeff will want to say a bit about the work that's happening with departmental plans, but yes, the aim is to look at the longer term and what more can be done to make our finances sustainable. Key part of that will be the transformation and looking to see how we can do things differently or how we can deliver better outcomes. It's not just about continuing to pour more money into doing the same thing. We need to look at how we can use our money more wisely and get better outcomes from that. Don't have a timescale for the transformation bids, but hopefully that will be coming forward shortly. In terms of the spending review, Treasury has indicated that they will make the next spending review announcement in mid-June. That will cover 3 years for Resourcedale, so up to 28-29, and 4 years for capital, up to 29-30. We would hope to tie our next budget process in with that. Finance Minister has been very clear that she wants to see multi-year budgets. So if we get the spending review outcome in June, then we would commence work on drafting those multi-year budgets over the summer with a view to having them in place before the start of the 26-27 financial year. And that is where the work on the 5-year plans will feed into that work we're doing sort of in autumn of this year to inform that. And Jeff might want to add a bit. Sorry.
I know. Sorry, just for Jeff to come in. It's the bit around how we measure the progress of departments then in terms of managing the budget, but then also prioritising for better outcomes at the other end. So is that built into that the departmental plan, and how is that going to be measured over that 5-year period? Thanks, Jeff. And
absolutely, we'll be looking at understanding. I think the first phase of this 5-year departmental plan will be getting the bigger picture from each department, understanding all the components that contribute to the costs that they have, the direction of travel that they're going, and some of the ways in which they will try and reduce those costs, the likes of transformation, not just the transformation fund itself, but general transformation. What are the ideas that departments will have? So that will be contained within the plans. We'll be looking at efficiencies within those plans as well, and trying to understand what departments are trying to do to be more efficient, more effective, more productive in their areas. We're also on the other side of our kind of forward work programme in terms of the budget improvement plan. We have also commissioned an exercise to start to understand the alignment between programme for government, albeit in draft form, and the 25-26 budget. So we have asked departments for information on how that aligns at spending area level, and we'll be starting to look at that to understand then where the budget is feeding into the executive's programme for government priorities. So between those kind of twin track approaches, we'll hopefully be able to understand and assess where departments are going, the direction that they're going, the amount of money that they're spending on the priorities that the executive have put in place, and also then where the pinch points are, where the pressures are within departments, and how they're planning to address those or at least reduce them.
Thanks.
Okay, is that you, Deirdre? Thanks. Okay, we now go to Paul Free.
Yes, thank you. So you touched a wee bit about on this, Joanne, with the chair. So we've said and we have ascertained that the baseline budget that we're going to get for 25-26 is far greater than the previous budget. When you add in all the in-year allocations, which were mighty, as you've already outlined, how does that compare then to the baseline budget 25-26?
Treasury took a different approach this year, which was part of the reset. Usually our baseline budget would be set on the last spending review, and any Barnett consequentials we've got in the interim do not go into our baseline. What they did in the autumn budget this year was that they actually gave us on the resource del side, they put into our baseline the Barnett consequentials that we got for 24-25 and into our 25-26 baseline. That's one of the reasons why it was a good spending review outcome. And then we got Barnett on top of that. Now, and Marianne will correct me if I'm wrong, what we don't know is, I'm assuming that what they will use for the next phase of the spending review for 26-27 won't include the Barnett that we got for 25-26, but it will basically be our 24-25 outcome. So it'll be interesting to see what that is. But certainly the approach they have taken this year was a reset and was different from what they normally do.
So a comparison then?
I think it's roughly about 600 million higher than the 24-25, the 25-26 position.
Right, okay.
That's after taking account of the, if you don't include the farm and fisheries stuff.
And of course, we're not expecting that big lift in year that we were expecting.
Definitely not.
We, at the start of the budget last year, we were always expecting a big lift in year.
We were.
And whilst the ministers were jumping up and down saying they hadn't enough, we always knew they were going to get more. That's not the case this year. We're not expecting this big lift in year. And you say that health is taking up 50.6%.
Yes.
Of this new budget.
Yeah.
What was it last year and the year before?
It was possibly slightly higher. I don't know that I have the figures in front of me for that. But it was
51.
Yeah, I think it was slightly higher. But in some ways that is, and I know other departments would say that, it's representative that in previous years other departments would say they were more underfunded in order to contribute funding to health. And if you look back to my other one about the health baseline and the increase, that was done at the expense of those other departments.
Yes, sure. If I can take you on to the sustainability plan then, Jeff. Jeff, you've certainly weaved your magic. There's 20 measures there with regards to increasing revenue. Take away those 20 measures and just centre in on the regional rate. And given the fact that the new rate in the budget, which is 5 and 3, am I right in saying?
Yes, that's right.
5 and 3. When you add that into the revenue raising and sustainability plan that you need to publish to spend 113 million, where does that get you? Just rates alone, where does that get you with regards to 113 million?
So in terms of rates alone, obviously the 24-25 position in the plan is about 43 million, 25-26 is about 47 million. Rates alone. When we factor in the changes that have happened both in 24-25 and 25-26, we're looking at about approximately, the latest position as of about 4 days ago was approximately 40 million in 24-25 and just over 37 million in 25-26. So the 25-26 has changed quite a bit. It's about a 1%, roughly just over 1% change in terms of the overall quantum of rates. But that's due to additional forecast updates, the latest position, uptake of relief, so on and so forth, in terms of their assessment for 25-26. The key measure obviously is changing the assumptions from 4 and 4 to 5 and 3 in terms of domestic and non-domestic increases. And there's one change as well to the comparator. So in the budget sustainability plan, we looked at it comparing it against a baseline. We reckon that that's actually not the right thing to do. We need to compare it to the 24-25 position, which continues to move, and that's why there's just a slight more change than we would have anticipated.
My point is that of the 113 million that we were meant to raise in revenue in order to relieve the debt, it was my impression that we were getting there simply through the rates raises. How far are we off?
So 77 million roughly will be gathered through the rates alone. So there's another 60, about 57 million or so that is other departmental increases.
Okay. With regards to the 20 measures that are laid out in the chart, they all seem to be already implemented in 2024.
Yes.
There are some incremental increases, TransLink, for argument's sake, 25-26 year, but majority of them have already been implemented. What has any impact assessments been done on any of these measures?
That'll be for individual departments to have carried out in terms of their when they are assessing changes.
Right. The one that strikes me the most, well, we'll talk a wee bit about the car parking charges. So we've added this in as revenue raising when it was always there anyway. It was going to be removed, but it was always there. So is that really truly additional spend, additional revenue raising?
Yes. So for the Department of Health have said that is truly additional revenue raising compared to the 23-24 position, and they have they're saying that that sort of 6 million or whatever it is additional for 24-25, and then a further.
Simply because they've taken it out of a budget line and then put it back in again.
Yes, exactly. This is what I've been saying. Yeah.
You could do that for any one of these. You could actually just decide one year you're not going to charge something, and then add it in the next year, and it's additional spend or additional revenue.
Not quite the case. We would be challenging departments a little bit around that, but obviously there are very unique circumstances around the hospital car parking charges.
So I'm not necessarily blaming you or the Department of Finance for this. So you could pose the question to the Department of Education or Health, but is this not sleight of hand?
I wouldn't call it sleight of hand, no.
And I think also we need to view this target as what it is. It was an arbitrary target sat in a financial package for the restoration of the executive. The more important thing is that the executive raises the income that is appropriate to do so in order to balance its budget and make its budget sustainable. That's the bigger picture. The focusing on the 113 million target in some ways is a bit of a distraction, because we need to balance our budget and we need the income to come in to allow us to fund the services we want to fund. And I think, while we can't speak for Treasury's view of it, I think that their view would be it's about making our finances sustainability, regardless of whether it's 113, 115 or 130 million. It's about sustainability.
Yeah, but arbitrary or not, it was a target set by the Treasury that we had to meet. The one that scares me the most is the current client contributions for the nursing and residential care homes. That's 10.6 million of an increase, which the burden is placed on vulnerable people.
Health would say that they have financial assessments that are done on those client contributions for nursing and residential homes that protect the most vulnerable.
So somebody's paying for this 10.6 million, and it's somebody that currently resides in a nursing or care home?
Yes, so those are client contributions from people who are within nursing and residential care.
Yeah, there's something really unfair, I think, about that sort of payment and placing the burden on those vulnerable people. There's one that strikes me as intriguing now. It's only 20,000. Electoral, 105,000. Exporting energy back to the grid, and that's down as additional revenue raising. Would we not be doing that anyway? Income from the sale of energy back to NI Grid, that's something we've been doing for years.
So this is obviously additional. I suspect that's the likes of installation of solar panels or something like that there, that whenever excess energy is generated, then it is paid back to the grid and creates an income stream.
So is it a series of new roofs that have been newly installed with solar panels? Or is it a change in a practice whereby instead of using the energy, they've sold it back to the grid?
I mean, I suspect that it might be a combination of both, but obviously excess energy we need to sell it back to the grid, otherwise it's wasted.
I think the problem with this Appendix D of the Budget Sustainability Plan is that whenever we returned, and I'm making some remarks here politically, it was presented by the media, and certain political parties were happy to go along with this, that this was an unbelievably penal set of options that were being faced by the executive. In many cases, what's listed in this appendix are things that are either happening anyway that do not involve any ministerial involvement, let alone political decision. Exporting energy back to the grid, which raises about 100 grand additional. I presume that's a forecast that an excess of energy will be generated and therefore sold back to the grid. That's no minister has responsibility for that. There's nothing politically controversial about that. And if you look at some of the other options that are in here, they include things like an inflationary increase in court fees. Now, not only did that not involve a politically difficult ministerial decision, it happened before ministers were even in office. This was a decision taken by the Lady Chief Justice in October 2023 to raise 3 million quid from increasing court fees in line with inflation. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing or a good thing. I'm simply saying that it was presented not necessarily by yourselves, but that the 113 million. I remember when I first started up as chair of the Finance Committee and leader of the opposition, I was asked questions by journalists. Oh my God, this 113 million is going to be so painful to raise. Really? This is 3 million quid in court fees which are paid by businesses who are litigating about whatever it could be. I do think that there's a couple of questions about us being transparent with the public about what has and hasn't happened. But that's a statement from me. Just on a couple of additional points, specifically in relation to health. So health is getting an uplift versus its 25-26 budget is both an increase on its post-monitoring rounds and post-Barnett's, but also an increase on its 24-25 opening position, yes, which is different from what happened the previous year, where there was a lot of controversy about that.
Yep.
Now, one might say, and if you look at what is in I know you haven't had a chance to look at it yet, the Health Minister's written ministerial statement today, where he is saying that it'll be 400 million short to deliver vital services, which is extremely concerning. Given the scale of what the Health Department eats up in terms of the budget, given the state of the health service, given all this work around budget sustainability, I think most people out there would have thought that the priority for the budget sustainability work and also the Public Sector Transformation Board, or the Public Service, I always forget which it is, Service or Sector Transformation Board, would have been making the health budget more sustainable, making the health budget more sustainable and also services more reliable. I suppose my question is, why hasn't it been more of a priority why hasn't health been more of a priority in terms of transformation? I mean, I asked a question before about why the PTSB simply didn't give all the 200 million to health in order to start to deliver transformation. I suppose that there's a question.
Right, well, we're not responsible for the Public Sector Transformation Board, and I am not over the detail of the transformation bid, so that is for them to answer that themselves. I would say that the Health Minister has an 8.4 billion budget. Of that, only 6.8 million is ring fence for anything. It is for the Health Minister to prioritise that within that. There is evidence of additional money going into health and the spend increasing, but there is little evidence of those outcomes, limited evidence of outcomes improving. I don't want to get into an argument around health. I would say all departments are facing challenges in that, but the question is quite simply, if the money goes to health, then it doesn't go somewhere else. And I think as we see all departments launch their own equality impact assessments, I think the vast majority of departments will be saying, we have issues, we have pressures, which begs the question, if we give more to health, where do we take it from? And yes, health transformation is absolutely a priority, and it will be a priority when we're looking at those budget sustainability plans and those long-term plans. But that has to be driven by the Department for Health, who are the ones that have the knowledge of the health system. With the best will in the world, we can challenge, we can ask questions, and we will do so. But we do not have that in-depth knowledge of what is happening in the health service and in the health trust. And as the Health Minister has that 8.4 billion budget to allocate as he sees fit to the health and social care sector.
I think thinking about the last few weeks, what a lot of people will be thinking is, first of all, just how the hell do we sort the health service out? Some of that are structural challenges around an ageing population, new advances in medical science. We know a lot of it is mismanagement, and we know a lot of it, some of it is cost pressures. I suppose the fundamental question for the executive, and it is for the Department of Finance, is a strategic priority to basically say to the health department, tell us what you need, where you want to spend money in order to get waiting lists down, deal with the crisis in ED, recruit the staff you need, and is there a 5-year plan, basically? And that might involve, you tell us what you think you need, but as the trade-off, we will ask you where waiting lists will be and where the health service will be and what the overall budget requirement will be in 5 years' time. I think that's the basic question the public out there want to know. Is there going to be a clear trade-off between either additional resource, and if the additional resource involves revenue raising, how is that, can they be assured that if they're having to pay more for something, that they're getting an improved health service? So I suppose that's the question. Is that part of the budget improvement or the budget sustainability work?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a fundamental part of our 5-year plans for departments. So we're asking departments to say, right, what's your strategic direction? What costs are you're facing? What's the cost demands? What's the demographic change that might change those costs? What does your workforce look like in 5 years' time? In the next 5 years, how are you going to look at income generation? How are you going to look at transformation? What are the things that you're trying to do in there? Are there any historical trends that show you the trajectory of your spend that we can kind of then help to inform that? Yeah. So we will ask in all departments, but you're right that if we can solve a health problem, it's much better if we do that in the shorter term. But we will be asking all departments to do that. Department of Health specifically, and they're looking at even engaging at the moment. They're engaging with trusts to look at that kind of longer term picture for them. And effectively, we will be saying, at the end of that process, your budget or the pressures that you face, is a huge, big flat line or a big increase, and your budget that you will get will not be as high. What are you doing to change that? What are you doing to make those two lines meet effectively? So we will be asking that, and that will be part of that.
They're preparing a 5-year plan for you at the minute. Then they should be ready to deliver something like a 5-year, particularly if there's a multi-year spending round coming from London. They and you should be in a position to deliver a kind of multi-year budget for health in the next year.
Yeah, so effectively those 5-year plans...
And presumably that will be alongside a targets on waiting list reduction.
Yeah, so, well, I'm not...
I know that's not for you to tell what those reductions are, but that I think the public want to see that joined up between your department, theirs, and the whole executive.
So effectively our 5-year plans will come in autumn and will dovetail effectively what the department is trying to do in terms of its budget. So the budget process will then be fed by those 5-year departmental plans, so that departments can say in the budget process, we're only bidding for the next 3 years of resource or whatever it is, but actually here is our 5-year plan, and shows you the things that we need, the pressures that we face, the issues that we're facing as well. So everybody has an idea of what that department looks like, all the components that add to the pressures within that department, and some potential solutions in there too.
Okay, I'm going to bring in Steve Aiken now. I should have just said I'm doing it very, very late, but I presume no one has any objections to Hansard recording this evidence. I should have done that right at the beginning. Steve Aiken.
Sorry, thanks everybody. I'm sorry for being in a bit late. I was attending a press conference about an election that I observed last year, and I just had to come in and listen in. And I thought we were talking at health questions rather than finance questions there for a bit. But thank you very much indeed, team, for what you're saying. But of course, one of the things that I'd like you to address, of course, is the pressures that health have been under, and everybody's understood them, because a year and a bit ago, when we were all sitting in various rooms, either in the Department for Finance building, or at least even around Hillsborough, in Hillsborough Castle, or on in the grounds around Hillsborough, it was readily understood that the prioritisation would have to be health, which all parties signed up to, and that all parties realised that there were going to be significant costs towards it as well. But my real question is, what is the balance of sort of the plans, particularly around sort of the future spending, particularly around the comprehensive spending review? Because there now seems to be a mismatch in resources that in how it's been allocated to Northern Ireland departments against the UK as a whole. And, we hear many people saying that we're spending over 50% on health in Northern Ireland. But again, that's the state of many other places around the world. And indeed, sort of the GDP being spent on that as well. So bearing in mind that health has considerable challenges, which everybody recognises we're into as well, what degree of flexibility in the system do you think that other departments are showing to recognise the issues around health? And bearing in mind that everybody said it was supposed to be the #1 priority, what prioritisation are we putting on it?
Okay. I think everybody does recognise the pressures facing the health service. I think there also has to be a recognition that there are pressures facing all departments. For example, the Department for Education, I imagine when they do their quality impact assessment, they will be saying something similar about the level of pressures they're facing. The health service has been, I would say, prioritised. The figure I mentioned to Jerry Carroll earlier was that if you go back to 2021, which was when the last executive came in and said they would prioritise health, that is what happened. Their baseline funding has increased by over 2.6 billion or 45.7% since the 2021 baseline. And why I'm referring to the baseline funding, not the in-years, that's the important bit, because that's the ongoing level of funding. That's the amount that we will give health year on year. It has went up by 2.6 billion.
Is that in real? So is that in?
That's it. That's
cash
just
terms?
in cash terms. That's not
But
in
that
real
would
terms.
be, but that would be a real terms. Are you fairly confident that would still be a real terms increase if you account
the numbers, but I'd imagine it would be at that level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Fine.
There
Sorry.
you go. So I would say that they have been. That's not taken away from the pressures that are facing health. If we look to this year and the budget 25-26, and I am not disagreeing what the Health Minister says about the increase compared to his October monitoring position. Yes, it is around 200 million, which is about 2.5% of an increase. But he's also talked about this funding gap of 400 million, and we need to put that into context as to what that would mean for other departments. So after meeting its earmark commitments, so things like welfare mitigations, victims' pensions, etc., the executive had 1.2 billion to allocate for general resource allocations in this budget. Of that 1.2 billion, health received 672 million, so over half of that. If we were to provide help with the 400 million to fund the funding gap on top of that, that would leave just 185 million for allocation to other departments. The amount required in budget 25-26 to uplift departments just to their October monitoring 24-25 position was 372 million. So if we were to give health the 400 million, other departments, most of it, not all of them, would be well below their 24-25 October monitoring position, where health would be 7.3% higher than that. So I think it needs to be, when we're looking at this, we need to look at the funding that's available, the pressures across all departments, who will all make the case, and then look at what is provided to each. In terms of the spending across the board in other jurisdictions, health, you're absolutely right that it's higher.
Yeah.
And you are right that
yeah,
the executive...
We're not comparing like with like. We're being constantly told that Northern Ireland is some way, or sort of the Northern Ireland health budget is some way an outlier. It's not. It's where sort of the prioritisation is being placed. And if you look at the prioritisation that's been placed by West Streeting and some of the key areas that have been there, we're not getting the same sort of prioritisation in Northern Ireland. So again, I emphasise this is the Finance Committee, and we're trying to look at sort of where the finance sort of the lines are. But it was a prioritisation process, and everybody agreed that health was going to be the priority. So there will be winners and losers, regrettably. But we need to put it within that context.
I think we also need to look at the impact on those other departments if they don't get the funding. And again, to put it into context, yes, so Northern Ireland receives a Barnett share of changes in England, but there are also a number of things through policy choices which Northern Ireland funds which it doesn't receive a Barnett share on. So we don't get Barnett consequentials for welfare mitigations, for victims' pensions. We don't charge for water. Those are all policy decisions based on the local situation here that the executive has made. That means we can't have a direct read across for what funding goes for in England to what funding goes for here. That is why we are devolved and we make those decisions. In terms of health, I would say that it has been prioritised by that 2.6 billion increase in their baseline. And yes, the increase between the October monitoring 24-25 to 25-26 is at 200 million. You might argue relatively modest. I would argue that there may be more funding in year, and it's not comparing like with like to do so. However, you also have to look at the need for all departments to deliver efficiencies, and I'm not entirely sure that is what we're seeing across the board. And I'll talk about health because that's what we're talking about. I would say all departments could go further than that. But there has been significant growth in the size of the health workforce in recent years. At the end of September 24, the HSE Northern Ireland workforce stood at 66,119 full-time equivalents, a 12% increase since 2019, which is fair enough, you would say, with the pressures. It has varied across staff groups. There's been between 2019 and 2024, 15% increase in administration and clerical staff. Medical and dental's increased by 16.5%, ambulance workforce only by 0.9%. But my earlier argument, despite this increase, there's limited evidence of improvement in outcomes. There are other indicators which point to areas for improvement within health. The overall decrease in throughput, average number of inpatients in each available bed, from 50.3 admissions per bed in 1920 to 41.1 admissions per bed in 23-24. Average length of stays in hospitals
Was that 1920 or 2020?
Sorry,
I thought I heard
1920, as in
Financial year
2020.
Financial year 1920.
Financial
Oh,
year.
sorry, financial year
Financial year.
1920.
Financial
Sorry,
year.
the link's not great. I
Sorry.
was hoping you weren't going back 100 and plus years. Even the Department of Finance wouldn't try that
do
one.
that. Well, we might if I had the data, but we don't.
Yeah, I wouldn't let you away with it. No.
Yeah. So
Even Paul Fruin might even perk up at that one.
Once we do have we have other witnesses. Okay.
So I won't go on, but I think it's just that there's evidence of there's limited funding. It has to be prioritised. All departments have pressures, and I think in all departments we could point to areas for improvement. I think the key is going to be in where we go forward from this in those 5-year plans, an element of realism. I would also caution, though Jeff may say otherwise to me, we will still have a finite pot of funding, and every department may come forward with a plan that's not affordable. The challenge for the executive is in deciding how to prioritise the funding, but those 5-year plans will help to inform that.
Okay. I think on that note, unless anyone has any urgent pressing questions, we're going to adjourn. Many more questions I think to ask, as always, are very useful. I would say, in parenthesis, I think it really does fundamentally come down to choices. I think we're clear now that, I would say, but I'm speaking on a personal basis, some of the choices that were or weren't made, there weren't actually choices in the Appendix D, and some of the choices that the executive has or hasn't made, and the health minister hasn't made, it will fundamentally come down to whether executive ministers are willing to actually make decisions, particularly after what has been said was a relatively unprecedented uplift in 24-25, and is not going to be as comfortable going forward. But in any case, today's briefing was really useful, and we will, I'm sure, hear from you again in the not too distant future. Thank you, Joanne, Jeff, and Ariane.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone. Joanne is back next week, of course. You never escape.
Thought you'd forgotten that.
Yes, indeed. No.
Not a member of the committee.
Okay, members, we are now going to have another briefing, which is our next agenda item. I don't think we have any particular follow-up action from that, because we're going to be hearing from the relevant officials.
If I just could suggest, the other committees will be interested in some of the extra nuance and detail that we've received today.
Yeah.
So if members are content that I write to the other clerks, just let them know where we've got extra information on, say, for example, the 5-year business plan pilot and so on.
I think we've had a lot today over the 5-year plans, the scale of what's happened over the past year. In some cases it hasn't happened. I think that's really useful. It would be helpful, because I intended to ask the officials, but I didn't, if we get clarity of the 5-year plans. I presume are going to be published, and we're going to see them when they are published, and hopefully they'll align to the Programme for Government and a multi-year budget. Okay, we're going to move on to the next agenda item, and thank you to our colleagues who've been patient in waiting for us. The next agenda item is a briefing from colleagues at Retail NI. First of all, I presume everybody's content that we have Hansard briefing again, Hansard recording the oral briefing. So members at page 330 of the meeting pack is a clerk's cover note. Page 334 of the meeting pack is Retail NI's written submission to the inquiry, and this is obviously has been a core bit of work for us over the past number of months, or the past nearly a year since we restarted. Members at page 344 of the meeting pack, we have additional information from the Consumer Council relating to households without banking, access to bank accounts, and one or two other points that members may wish to raise, either subsequent to either during this session or subsequent to it. At page 347, page 348 of the meeting pack, the Justice Committee has noted our correspondence in relation to this inquiry, as has the Justice Committee and the Education Committee has done likewise. But we're going to welcome to the meeting now Glenn Roberts, who's Chief Executive of Retail NI, and Chris O'Reilly, who is Board Member of Retail NI. So Chris is a business owner in my constituency, I should say, and very respected one too. But we'll invite Glenn to make an opening statement.
Sure, thank you for the opportunity to present today. I think, as you say, you have our submission that we sent some time ago, And very much what I'm maybe going to do is set the context of which Retail Alliance members operate in the banking side, and Chris will go on in more detail in terms of the post office situation, and Chris obviously is a sub-postmaster himself. Obviously you're aware that the Finance Minister did host a summit, an Access to Finance summit, some time ago, which Chris represented. I was at the previous one when Minister Murphy was in the role, and that day we outlined the important role that our members play in this. And it's worth pointing out that 80% of all post offices in Northern Ireland and a significant number of the 1,800 ATMs are in retail and iStores. And that's not exclusively grocery stores. You know, you'll find post offices in pharmacies as well, and some of our pharmacy members have post offices in as well. And obviously there are 441 post offices in Northern Ireland. And I think it's worth pointing out the community role in this, because sometimes that's the missing link in this. We can be very focused in terms of the economy and jobs and access to finance. But it very much our members, and you can find our members in every village, town and city of Northern Ireland, but they see that community role as being so important. Indeed, with the provision of ATMs, post offices, in many respects they have filled the void left by so many banks closing their branches. And of course that bank closure programme, and there are understandable reasons why they did that, is not just restricted to many rural areas, and indeed in your constituency, Chair, there isn't a single, or Norma Road in your constituency, there isn't a single bank left. Where our office is in Ballyhackamore, I think you're hard pushed to find in the length of the upper and lower Newtownards Road a single bank left. An ATM provision again is equally, you can only really find in our members that are there on that road, and indeed, as you know, in your constituency as well. And of course, it is also worth pointing out the impact the ATM robberies had. Obviously, the last time we had the serious a number was in 2018, 2019, and that further accelerated the decline of ATM provision when some terrible damage was done to many rural stores. And thankfully, whilst we still have the occasional attack, they are thankfully becoming few and far between. I think there's a number of points to point out. I think it's worth also saying that the decline of cash usage has stabilised. It still remains the second popular way to pay. And indeed, the number of people mainly using cash for day-to-day spending has hit a 4-year high, indeed partly related to the cost of living crisis. Some 1.5 million, and this is UK-wide figures, adults mainly use cash in 2023, the first rise really since 2019. The FCA point out that Northern Ireland has a higher reliance on cash than any other region, with 13% of adults saying they use cash to pay for everything, including most things, including bills, compared to just 5% in England and Wales and 7% in Scotland. And of course, as constituency MLAs, you know that many people on benefits, many pensioners use cash to budget. So the provision of access to cash, whether it's ATMs or bank branches, isn't really just a problem in rural areas. As I've pointed out, it is becoming an important issue in urban areas as well. I think there are just now 110 bank branches remaining in Northern Ireland, which equivalent to 5.8% of per 100,000 of the population, and that was again according to Which in September 2024. And when any high street business closes, there is a knock-on effect. And what we've seen when banks, like any other high street business, close their branches, it starts the domino effect, because that means there's less footfall for surrounding traders. And what you then start to see is the domino effect. And of course, Northern Ireland has the highest shop vacancy rate and highest levels of dereliction in any part of the UK. So it is an important issue, and understandable as it is that less people are going into bank branches, it still does leave a void, and it does, you know, in obviously a significant way, still contribute to the decline of the high street. And we welcome the new rules by the FCA, which mean that banks will have to give more consideration to a local community's cash needs when they decide to close a branch. So we've a number of asks. Some of them are in our report. So there are a number of things that we want to consider. Obviously, the Finance Minister reactivated the rural ATM rates relief. And again, that was a welcome thing. It was something that required a vote in the Assembly. It was something we tried to get when the Assembly was down. Secretary of State to reactivate via Westminster, but that was not to be. So I think that is important. But what we've also done, and we were looking into this, given that this is now not just a rural town or rural village issue, it's as much an urban issue as well. So the consideration of extending that rates relief to the same conditions that are there for that ATM relief in rural areas to urban areas as well. Likewise, post offices get, there's 3 levels of rates relief for post offices. Again, what we'd like that is to consider full rates relief for post offices to stabilise that part of the market. Obviously, that would relate to the element of the part of the store which has the post office. Obviously, as you know, Chair, we're trying to get significant amount of rates relief in other areas for different reasons. And we also want local, regional and national governments to actively look at what extra services could be provided to post offices. And whilst I think we do welcome the banking hubs, what we would like to see in retail now is, if you like, a post office first approach to that, to see what more we can do to enhance post offices, the post office network. And it is worth pointing out, I'll just conclude in this bit, our members that have post offices and ATMs, they don't make pretty much any money out of that. It is a footfall driver for them, but it's also, they recognise their role as community retailers, the role they play in supporting their customers, and they recognise that as an important role, which they're prepared to do. And what you're seeing is our members stepping up and providing a hands-on response to the bank closure programme. Chair, I'll hand over to my colleague, Chris.
Thank you, Glenn, and thanks to everybody for the opportunity to.
And I should say thank you, particularly as a business owner, because we recognise that this is you have businesses to run, so your time is more valuable.
I'm going to consider this a very good investment of my time.
I hope so.
So the right to access cash, I am probably going to articulate today that I'm paying for it, and that's what I want. That's what I want to share. At the Banking Roundtable, I put a similar point to the Minister as well, but I'd like to flesh this out a little bit, and it'll go through the context of the post office. Okay, and I think you will hear from the Federation of Sub Postmasters at a point in time as well. But I'll maybe whet the appetite before the big guns roll in behind that. So this is a granular understanding of what it's like for me as a business operator to sustain the right to access to cash. And as the banks are disappearing off the high street and the post office, 441 branches across Northern Ireland versus 110 bank branches, we're going to be the funnel for providing that. So the post office viability is in a very precarious position right now. You'll have seen the topical stuff around the Horizon inquiry, but the bigger crime sort of committed against postmasters over not a bigger crime, sorry, a lesser crime committed to postmasters over a longer period of time, is we have not been getting the adequate pay rises for us to be able to sustain the post office network. So the network is in a precarious position. And I'll take you back, I'll romanticise a bit and take you back to the heart of lockdown, when the social value of the post office was fully appreciated. We kept people connected, and then as we came out of that and we went into the energy crisis, it was the post office that delivered the payments out to people overnight across all of the UK. So it's a very, very powerful network, both from a community contribution and also from a functional end of it. But as a mechanism of infrastructure, it is massively underfunded, and I'll give context to that. The network went through a transformation activity between 2015 and 2018, and there's a class action being brought about now by a number of postmasters to say that was a very, very poor outcome for postmasters going through that transformation. We had our base wage removed from us, and we were cajoled onto a commission-only network. That commission-only network in turn hasn't provided enough pay rises for us to remain sustainable. And at this point in time now, 70% of postmasters across the UK earn less than the living wage from their post offices. And indeed, I supplement the post offices within the 3 post offices that I have. I supplement that with my retail proposition. I will lose approximately £80,000 this year operating 3 post office branches. That's the deficit that will come about from that. And the network transformation model that was sold to us back then was that we would become the front end of government. So we would have this funnel of footfall coming towards us, and that we would generate more transactions, and that would offset the wage that we would lose, and in turn it would keep us sustainable and viable. The exact opposite has happened. Government has digitised and has stepped away from the post office counters, and indeed one of the small government services that we have remaining with us, which is DVLA, is on a ticking clock because that contract may or may not be extended by central government. When a bank leaves a high street, a bank will on average save about £600,000 in that closure. Okay, so that's the price that the bank has for closing. And we would articulate that the right to access to cash needs to be paid for by banks and government. It needs a bigger contribution than what we're currently getting. Cash isn't leaving society, as Glenn discussed there, and indeed we in December as postmasters took more cash in over our counters than at any point in time in our history. So an element of that is to do with closures, but we do see in society that cash usage has stabilised. My business would have been let's say 60% cash, 40% electronic. Coming out of COVID, we lurched down to about 70-30, and it's staying at 70-30. I do not see any drop off in cash usage.
Say 70 card.
70 card now, 30% cash.
Yeah, and that's probably, and given what we talked about before, that's probably relatively higher compared to the rest of the UK. That would be
yes, it is. It is higher. Yeah. And on the flip side of that, we are seeing the consumer behaviour, and anecdotally you hear this at the counters, both at the tills in the store and at the post office, that people who are maybe less, you would perceive them to be maybe less financially sophisticated, but they're using cold hard cash as a budget mechanism. So they take the money out, they put it into the purse or the wallet, and that becomes a effective way of controlling budget management of income. In my 3 branches, per month, I handle approximately £2.5 million in cash, either in and out to the business, and I earn around about £5,500 for doing that. Okay, that's 35% of my overall income coming in from. So banking has become a very big part of what the post office network now is. It used to be a very small remunerator. It's now the second pillar behind meals at the moment, from an income contribution. 35% of my staffing costs for the same period will be £7,000 there or thereabouts. So I'm losing £1,500 a month handling cash. It's a back of a fag packet type of thing, but if you forensically analyse that out, I don't think I would be too far from that. So I'm subsidising. In my eyes, I'm subsidising the right to access cash. I attended the Banking Roundtable on Glenn's behalf recently with the Minister, and the CEO of the Financial Conduct Authority was there, and he was very, very positive about how 99.9% of people in an urban environment are less than 1 mile away from being able to access cash. And my question back to him was, yeah, because I'm paying for it. In simple terms, that's exactly how I see it. And from the precarious nature of the post office network, Post Office Limited have now finally recognised that 50% of postmasters, businesses and post offices alone are not viable and are loss making. So they've produced a transformation plan, and that the transformation plan is an aspirational £250 million to be paid to postmasters over the next 5 years to increase our wages to ensure the viability of the network. 120 million of that is due to come out in the 2025-2026 fiscal year, which is a couple of months away. This is all subject to central government approval and also government placing extra funding into the post office network. The transformation plan has not yet been presented to the Federation of Sub-Postmasters. Me as a postmaster, I do not understand what that looks like, and how am I supposed to budget a small business employing just over 90 people across the city whenever I have national insurance, living wage increases coming at us, energy costs are not necessarily abating, and I do not know what income I'm going to have coming forward, and nor do I know whether that income is actually going to arrive at my door come April or beyond, because the government and Post Office Limited are yet to make that clear to us. So please, can we ask? My ask is pretty immediate. What pressure can you bring to central government and Post Office Limited to bring clarity to how our network is going to be supported? Because we are in a very, very, very precarious position. It's very nice to hear the top line aspiration of £250 million over 5 years, but where's the detail? When am I getting my pay rise so I can sustain? Leases will come to expire on some of my premises, and I'm trying to make commercial decisions as to whether to remain open, or whenever I refurbish my sites and go back to reinvest, should I just take the post office away? Yeah. You know, and should I then use that for additional space for selling space that will generate me income? So the ask is, please, can, you know, as MLAs, can we put pressure on central government to come forward and give me that understanding? The banking framework 4 is now concluded as well, and we have no idea what our pay rises are going to be around handling cash, and that conversation has been concluded. Please, can we understand that? Please, can we understand what budget we have taken ourselves forward into the next fiscal year?
That's agreed between, so that's a framework that is agreed between the banks, as in the
commercial arrangement between Post Office Limited and the banks.
Is it UK Finance or whatever that do they negotiate on behalf of the banks, or is it actually, do the banks appoint?
I am not over the granular detail of that, but all I know is that my pay rise is going to be debated between those two. And
the department on the extra investment, the 250 million, which is supposed to be to effectively a pay rise for some postmasters, is supposed to be, that's the what it changed its name every 5 minutes now. I think it's DBT now, is it? The Department of Business and Trade in London. That's the Whitehall department, wouldn't it be? We can certainly correspond with them and ask them. I'm sure we'd be happy to do that. Sorry, go on ahead, Chris.
So banking framework is in place. We need to ensure also that the proposed rolling of banking hubs out onto the high streets, as Glenn alluded to there, we need a post office first approach. So if we can provide banking services, the postmaster should be protected first, because we can't have another government-led initiative that takes more revenue potentially away from our counters. So we would ask that the postmasters put first. Now, thankfully, that if a banking hub was to come to the Ormer Road, I get the opportunity of first refusal as the postmaster for the area, let's say, which is some solace of comfort. But post office first should be where we're at. I think from a government point of view as well, both locally and centrally, we can do more to promote the role that post office provides within the banking network. Consumer Council research came back reasonably recently that said only 1 in 2 people recognise that they can do basic banking facilities at a post office counter. And again, that's, if we can get a marketing plan behind that to stimulate footfall in there, it'll make life a little bit easier for us. But we think that the government and the banks need to do more around that. Me trying to market that myself on my own.
I just ask on that, because obviously there's a differential position here in terms of the banking market, meaning there's still 80, I think it's 80+% is the stat we found, that are still the traditional big four: AIB, Danske, Bank of Ireland, Ulster, which is just a slight, obviously we have Nationwide and Santander, etc. here too, but they're still the dominant players in the sort of personal banking. Should they be doing more? I don't know exactly how it works in terms of the framework, if they put money behind the marketing of it, in terms of the framework that's agreed, but should the locally based banks be doing more to support? I
believe, absolutely. So when a branch closes, there is a mechanic that kicks in, and I've gone and done this myself, which is it's a very awkward exercise. You go into the branch that's closing and you canvass and you basically say to the folk that are coming in, you can still bank up the road and in the post office there.
Yeah.
Trying to sell that brand at the moment is quite hard, given what it's gone through over the last 12 months after the
Horizon
and the Bates stock. And we actually, when I watched Bates, the documentary on ITV last year, halfway through the second episode, I was texting into my Federation Sub Postmasters WhatsApp group going, guys, we're going to get pummeled here because it's going to look like it's us, that have prosecuted and defrauded people.
People like you.
The general public probably didn't realise that we were, that we were independent investors in a franchise. So there was a whole spin that needed to be put around that. So trying to sell the post office brand as a trusted brand, there's a big recovery process that needs to be done there as well. So again, the more that we can get.
Just thinking about the average person, and I'll bring others in to ask questions in a second if that's okay, but just thinking about in Barnsley, to pick somewhere in England at random, if a when you, the Ormer Road in my constituency is what you operate there. No, we've now had in the last years, Bank of Ireland shut Ulster, I think, is out. So there were several, I think they were all represented at one point in the Ormer Road, they're all gone now. You would think that if that was Barnsley, if it was Barclays, HSBC, Santander, all shut on a road in Barnsley, there might, I don't know if there would be, but there might be a framework in place so that they would be going to the local postmaster and saying, because they're part of their argument, of course, when they close as well. Of course, you've got the post office. You can still bank with Santander, HSBC. Is that happening here with the local banks?
Post office will be contacted, and then post office will send a representative into that branch during the closure period to communicate to the customers that the branch is closing and they can do banking at their local post office. And I'm invited to be part of that process. Okay. That's it. It's a pretty fruitless process. Okay. You end up with very little leads off the back of it. Some small businesses who are heavily reliant on that branch will come to you very quickly, but that message needs to be amplified. The banks are leaving the high street. They're not going to service you for cash, and if you need cash, the post office is the place to come and the place to come to get it. We won't charge you £1 out of an ATM machine to take it out or whatever else. Yeah. We will come and give it to you free of charge. Okay. So we need more services at the counters. That's from a post office point of view. So from a legislative point of view, we're not even on an equal playing field with our postmasters over across the water. Another big area of development is PUDO, which is pick up and drop off at the post office. So you've all done your online shopping and you don't want to put it at the front door, so you get it delivered to your local postmaster. Every has been outsourced into Northern Ireland, which makes it a more costly model to run in Northern Ireland, which means less postmasters have access to it. I'm lucky enough to have every at Ormer Road. I've only recently got it. The Park Centre and Queens don't get that. DPD is across the water, and in most postmasters branches across the water, DPD is not available in Northern Ireland in the PUDO model, because when Post Office negotiated the contract, they neglected to realise that DPD Ireland is a different entity than DPD UK, so the Post Office Limited would not pay for the EPOS interface, for all the IT technology that needed to happen to interface the two businesses together.
Post Office UK would not pay this because you need a different thing, because DPD Ireland do deliveries here.
DPD Ireland, you would have to pay to integrate into their IT platform, rather than you weren't integrating into DPD UK, and they looked into the Northern Irish market and went, well, that's just going to be so small that we'll never see our money back out of that.
It was DPD that didn't bother, or
no,
it was the
Post Office.
Okay, and then presumably they have that for An Post.
I don't know about anything about the southern market, truthfully.
Okay.
But what I'm articulating is the cost to operate for a Northern Irish postmaster is even more precarious than it is across the water, because we do not get the same access to the opportunity to drive revenue, and our commercial rates are significantly higher, and we're not getting the rate relief either. So we are really backs to the wall, and it comes through in my numbers. When I first invested in this business and moved in to operate it, I probably would have cleared a profit of maybe £10,000 to £15,000
on the cash handling post office.
No, from the whole offering, the whole model, 3 branches. We would have broke even probably throughout the year, and then made profit at peak, which was December. I'm now in a significant loss-making position operating those assets. And if we can get the government to say they will fund and bring the funding that the post office have said that they need, and they'll underwrite it and we can develop, then yes, we take our liabilities at the moment, we will turn them back into assets, and it leaves us in a better position. And then in the long run, it leaves all post offices in a better place to be able to support the access cash. So.
When Reagan calls for a question, I might just, after we've done question on this bit, if it's okay, ask you both a question or two about the broader picture around commercial banking, as in availability of credit, customer service. I'm not asking for commercially sensitive information about you. You've been very helpful giving us an honest picture of your proposition, Chris, and anything else from the broader membership, Glyn, around access to capital, customer service, all those things. But we'll just focus on the post office banking bit first, and I'm going to bring Diane, Deputy Chair.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you both for being here today. I wanted to ask, Glyn, is there any data around what seems to be, from my experience, a move back to more cash in terms of our local businesses? I'm seeing a lot more signs, please use cash if you can, and we have a card machine, but really, really encouraging that. Is that something that would be significant, or you would have any information around?
Well, I would safe to say, and of course, I struggle to find any retail I remember right across our thousands of members that would be cash only. I think it is important that you all stay one step ahead of where your consumers are, and let's face it, it is about making sure obviously you process card payments or on your phone or on this now as well, and still accept cash as well. So it is important. I think it is difficult when you see occasional businesses, and for the main they tend to be more on the sort of hospitality side, the food to go, small cafes that say cash only. I think in one sense I understand, but again, you know, they are doing a disservice for a large amount of the population that just rely on their card who don't carry cash. But in the same sense, it's important that if you're a retailer that you are able to accommodate cash payments or card payments. You do have another extreme, small coffee kiosks, and I've seen this in Belfast City Centre where they say card only. So I think the solution is somewhere in between to make sure that you accept both. And I think just to back up some of the points I was raising there, I think it's important that we don't, if you like, pigeonhole every elderly person as not being tech savvy. I got told off when I was talking about this on radio by my two parents who are in their 80s who use their banking app all the time to send their grandchildren Christmas money and can do it and navigate it very well. So I think it's important that we just don't say all people are above 65 just carry wads of cash around, and that's not the case. I think where retailers need to be, they need to be flexible, they need to be where their consumers are. And whilst, yes, the use of the decline in cash usage has stabilised, still the vast majority of transactions are through cards, and it's important now that every retailer is able to accommodate that.
No, absolutely, and totally agree with you. My 89-year-old Granda is very tech savvy and is on every app going and keeps me right a lot of the time. I wanted to ask you a wee bit about if you feel there's enough support or there should be more support across both of you on this one. Support for retailers or the likes of post office where you're trying to host free ATM services within your actual shops or locations.
I'd like to take that one if you don't mind. So I have an ATM in Mayor's Road, which is now turned off. It's turned off because I've come out of my commercial contract with the supplier who's recently been bought over by Pivotal. The reason I decided to turn the ATM off was when the interest rate spiraled. The cost to handle cash brought significant cost into the ATM provider that was supplying me, and my rate of 5 pence per transaction that I was getting for each customer that used the ATM dropped from 5 pence to 0.1 pence. So it wasn't even covering the electricity that it was drawn down off and because I was outside the contract, I was well within my rights to turn it off. So are we getting enough support to provide free cash? No, because 0.1 pence per transaction will not. And that then knocks on to, let's say, the surrounding businesses. So people who are coming across to Errigal or going to the pubs in the evening or whatever, who want to get a bit of cash out or whatever, can't get it. So it's
as well. It would be the foot flow of that. I know that there's a lot of feedback I would get from some of my local towns that people come in to get their cash and they'll get a few things around it, especially if it's in the post office and they'll do a couple of other things, or it's in a particular shop or whatever it is that they'll come in to get their cash and a few things around it. But no, it's really, really useful feedback, especially because a lot of the time whenever the banks close, the first thing people are looking for back is actually the cash machine. It's not necessarily a new banking hub, and that has been my experience in my constituency. And the banking hubs don't all come with cash machines, or certainly not 24-hour cash machines outside of premises. So
what you'll find as well in that is that the ATM model of 10 years ago was really good because a company agreed to put the ATM in, but what you did was you lodged your own cash into it and it brought your banking charges down. You won't probably be able to generate enough cash now to put the ATM in, which is why you get so much intermittent outages. The model that I chose for Mayor's Road was to have the cash company support the cash going into it, so I had nothing to do with it. It literally just was almost a rental, and I got less commission off the back of it, but I was never going to generate the cash, nor did I particularly want to take the risk of having to, put the cash into it, because your insurance has a whole pile of loopholes that you have to jump through to be able to do that. So if it runs out of cash during the day, technically I can't fill it. I have to wait until the store's closed and there's no members of public in. So yeah, there's nowhere near enough support to...
Would it be fair to say the insurance and the practicalities around that would be significant as well, to have a cash?
Insurance has been a real challenge over about the last 3 years. It's jumped up significantly, and even mitigations that we've put in, we are not seeing that. We're not seeing that drop down. The indications are it might be a little bit softer when I go to market in March now. There seems to be a little bit more appetite to come in and take that risk from insurers, but no, it's north of 20k.
And the ATM robberies didn't help in that regard as well.
Is that 20k just to insure the ATM? No. So how was that? No. Okay, but it's still... Okay.
No, absolutely, because obviously the policy intention is there with the finance minister. She has rates relief on, in particular, rural ATMs. So the intention is to support them in principle, but to go a bit further to actually support retailers for the foot flow, to get people in, to support post offices is something that would make a good impact.
I think Dan, it's very much the hub of or the central, I suppose, to our message is seeing our high streets as community hubs, not just places of business, as community hubs. And the post office is at the centre of that, along with the grocery store, the pharmacy, and so on. And I think that model is still relevant today, because it's not just about economics or jobs or business. It's about that sense of community. And I quite often like to describe our members not just as community retailers, but community entrepreneurs, because their business model is being at the heart of the community. And that's not just a strapline, that is integral to their business model. And it's probably why Northern Ireland has a higher density of independent retailers and small businesses than any other part of the UK, because it is that community ethos that you keep in your feet fairly established in the local community.
How many post offices are there left in Northern Ireland that are doing those standalone functions?
Standalone?
Yeah, so for example, I know in my area most of them are post office counters in shops. Yeah. Now I'm quite a rural area, so I appreciate that's not.
I think what you'll find is it's the Crown or the directly managed branches that are earmarked for the closure, are the ones that are sitting independently, because I don't know a post office in the land that can operate on its own and provide profit.
Because were there a hub the way you're explaining it like that, I can't visualise that in a lot of the areas around me, because so long since there was that, and then the move then towards the likes of the banking hubs is seen as somewhere positive, because rather than doing all your banking standing at a row at the back of a busy supermarket, to be able to do it in a banking hub is seen as a positive step, whereas actually to have gone away from the post office into the shop out to the banking hub is maybe part of the problem. So as you say, to make that consideration should it be to go to recreate a post office hub? And just finally, I wanted to ask a little bit more around, you were saying there in terms of the banking hubs, so you want to move to a post office first scenario, but you get first refusal on the banking hub. So I just want to understand a little bit more about what the post office first option would be there.
It's about understanding what the banking hub is actually bringing. So how many services are they actually bringing? So my understanding is, at this moment in time, and it's slightly uninformed, so I would take this with a caveat, there's not much there's not much you can do in a banking hub beyond bring cash in. So, and I think that conversation came up at the banking roundtable where we were there, that the FCA are only tasked to deliver the cash end of the banking business. There's no regulatory framework around providing the other services that come along with it. So what actual services and banking services you can get at a banking hub, I think that would need to be questioned and understood. And if it is a paltry sort of just rock up once a week for a few hours and talk to a few customers for PR, why should that hub be there if it's not really doing anything other than lifting cash? If you can put that through a post office. So let's say in whatever governance structures are put in place, that somebody identifies that the Ormer Road needs a banking hub, yes, it should come to me, but essentially what it's going to do is dilute my business. as well, and then okay, I get to operate inside it rent free because the banks take the cost on that, but I still have to provide the labour. And judging by the modelling that I've articulated today, that doesn't look to be a particularly profitable process. Albeit there is a fixed wage again for banking hubs, which would lead you back a little bit to say then the transformational stuff that happened in 2015 around the post office we've been sold a pup, because if you're having to put a fixed wage in to operate a banking hub, then surely to goodness there's compelling evidence to say we need more to come into the post office to keep it sustainable. I suppose my articulation is very, very simple. It's a very, very, very precarious situation, and commercially, without this transformational monies being promised to us, and it's promised, it hasn't arrived, would I exit the 3 services commercially with my commercial hat on? I should walk away from all 3, and that will mean loss of jobs. It will mean potentially closures of sites as well, which isn't the burgeoning economy that we're all striving towards.
I suppose it's not. It's not about reinventing the wheel.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I think it is, if there is a viable post office network or post office in that area that can do what a banking hub does with enhanced services, then obviously that means that you're not going to have the duplication. But I think is it a preference that if you can enhance a local business to do this, then yes, that's always a good thing.
Maybe just give you another one working example. I recently started another limited company for myself, and I couldn't go to my branch and open a business account. I had to do it completely digitally.
Yeah.
Frustrating, no relationship building. If I wasn't technologically confident, it was, and even being reasonably commercial, even actually filling in the application forms and the IDs and even the stuff from company's house that I had to bring in and produce. It was the first time I had set up a bank account for a company myself. It wasn't easy, very frustrating, and it took weeks. And that came across in the banking roundtable as well, that this digital stuff is very, very faceless. Yet I have an Ulster bank that is our bank for our retail business, and I couldn't go in and speak to somebody there.
Presumably you banked with them for a long time.
Sorry?
You've been banked with them for a long time, I presume.
Yeah. The only benefit of me applying for the business bank through that channel, through that bank that we were already known to, was I'm KYC'd. They know it was me, and I wasn't money laundering. It was less.
You have to go through less process, but there's no customer service advantage for you.
No, not at all. And it was a real barrier to. I was reliant on inboxes, emails, even setting up the online banking. I didn't get one of the notifications of one of the key numbers that I get, even though allegedly the email had been sent, it didn't arrive, wasn't in my junk. Digitisation has moved too far. So if a banking hub is coming onto a high street to be nothing more than a place for you to deposit money and for the bank to do a little bit of softer PR, then that's why I would say post office first in, because they're not doing anything more than what we're doing, and it funnels footfall towards a network that needs footfall growth.
I think just a final point to note, I think that there definitely needs to be a bit more promotion around the generic capabilities of banking services of the post office, because this is my experience and the feedback coming through and the learning is important from the banking hubs in different areas. So in my local banking hubs, you have the desk where, as a post office function, you can lodge and deal with your cash all the time, but because they then have the office that different days of the week they have people from different banks, people think that if they, for example, are Ulster Bank, they can only lodge money on a Monday. People think that they can only lodge First Trust on a Wednesday, and it's actually become this, and it's a real challenge that the banking hubs are facing, whereas actually to say you can go and lodge and do your cash business at the post office anytime. So this is a real thread of miscommunication that's coming through on those, but I think definitely promoting awareness of those services. But thank you very, very much. It's been really informative, and I really appreciate it, because your type of post office isn't one that I'm coming into contact with very much in my constituency. It is very much those counters in supermarkets. But thank you.
Okay, Judy Hargy.
Yeah, no, thanks very much to Chris and Glenn for coming in, and obviously we'll follow up with this as well. And I'm sure at the end, particularly on the post office issue that you've raised, Chris, I mean, there's some straightforward actions, I'm assuming, as a committee, we can probe in terms of Westminster and also the post office themselves. And I suppose it does fit into our inquiry, particularly around access to cash. And I suppose one of the big issues here, as you say, in terms of the increase in-cash transactions linked to poverty and inequality levels here as well. I know it was one of the issues that emerged through COVID in terms of even supermarkets, the larger chains, where they would deal a lot more in cash here in the north than maybe what they would across the water. So that is an area that we want to look at in terms of that inclusion piece. But also, as you say, in terms of the making financial power work for local communities and local places. And as you say, Glenn, the kind of retail and the importance of our arterial routes and our local towns and city centres as well. And I suppose, I mean, I know you've touched on some of the Westminster stuff, that we could be looking at around the market and plan, I suppose, access to additional services. But what could we be doing locally, through the devolved assembly in terms of encouraging that type of approach? Is there more, areas that you could identify? The other bit I was going to ask around financial power locally, and obviously we know banks are beginning to go more online. And I suppose the strength with the likes of the post office or the credit union is that face-to-face contact, and maybe it is a bit more marketing in terms of encouraging that. I was going to ask Chris, in terms of the post offices, is there engagement or dialogue between yourselves and the credit unions? And is there the potential to maybe, do some work collectively on these things that would be mutually beneficial, because you are both on the high street and on our arterial routes as well? And I suppose you'll be aware that the department are doing a cost of doing business piece of research in terms of looking at wider implications. I know you touched on some of the stuff around insurance and rents, obviously national insurance contributions and the impact that's going to have. I'd just be keen, Glenn, to hear from yourself or even Chris more directly around, what are some of the big issues and hurdles that are going to be coming down the line over the next short to medium term period that we need to be alert to as well? Thanks.
Hi, Deirdre. Thank you for your questions. I think that certainly the Finance Minister has initiated a review of the various business rates relief schemes. And I think that the current rural ATM relief scheme is due to expire in March of this year. So this would be an opportunity to look at that and to look at what I call obviously the urban dimension to all of this as well, because it's no longer just a rural challenge. So I think that there is something there, and I think obviously again, there are 3 levels of rates relief for post offices that are there. I think that needs to be looked at, and perhaps going further in that regard. What that does is that sort of stabilises the network. It stabilises those businesses that are there, and I think that reinforces all the points that Chris has made in terms of the challenges of running a post office and the cost of running a post office as well. I think that if we looked at tweaking the rates for post offices and ATMs, that would take the edge off some of the costs there, because it has been a case where our members have stepped into that breach, where banks have closed, they've taken their ATMs with them, and our members have stepped in, and a lot of them have paid high costs of that. And the ATM robberies was just a terrible time. I was recording an interview for the BBC this week about the 1819 when there were dozens of ATM robberies, and the impact that had, not just in those businesses, in those family-owned businesses, but also those communities that they serve as well. And those repercussions about those ATM robberies are still being felt to this day, and we shouldn't underestimate the impact of that. Obviously, that brought, and we do welcome the fact the Minister has initiated a cost of doing business review. That's something we were very keen to see. And addressing the cost of doing business crisis is the top concern for this administration and obviously the Westminster government as well. On April of this year, we face a perfect storm, a triple whammy of increases, national insurance, increases in the living wage, and then you have the local and regional rates as well. I can't underestimate the impact that is going to have on not just the members that I and Chris represent, but on all small businesses and the economy as a whole. It is a freight train hurtling this way that will damage this region of the UK more than any other because of the high density we have. And that has implications for what we're here to talk to today as well. So it is crucial that we see government at all levels doing whatever they can to support businesses, because what is happening in April, quite frankly, as someone who has played a leadership role in 2 business organisations for nearly 25 years now, I am desperately worried what is going to happen in April of this year. And I'm not in any way exaggerating what is happening or what is going to happen. I worry that it will close businesses. We're already surveying our members about the impact that this is going to have, which I think complements what the Finance Minister and her colleagues are doing in this regard. And the initial survey results that I've seen are quite frankly spellbound. They're scary. What the expansion plans put on indefinite hold, closing branches, cutting back on staff hours, cutting back on employing people. Now, I know, Chair, I've strayed slightly into
we wanted you to.
Yeah, but Deirdre, I hope that answers your question. But at the heart of what we want is that network there to serve the local community, because that's sometimes we forget about all of this, that we're not just talking about business or economy or rates or national insurance or all those complicated things. This is about serving local communities to make sure that they have access to cash, and we've always seen our town centres and our high streets as more than just places of business. They have to be community hubs that bring people together. That model, whatever the changes or whatever way we want to redefine 21st century high streets, that community hub model, whether it is the Ormer Road or the Upper Newtownards Road or whether it is any number of rural towns, that community hub model is now more important than ever before.
Just to come back to your point about collaborations with the credit unions and post office, no, I don't believe there's any formal collaborations there. However, we both had very similar points to make at the Banking Roundtable. The articulations that I was making were very much reflected in what the credit unions were saying as well about the cost to handle cash. And in relation to the cost of doing business, as quickly as we could get that survey understood, and because in very simple layman's terms, a small family run business, which myself and my business partner are, employing 90 people across our 5 stores, it will cost us at least £1,635 per person once the NI, employer's NI insurance drops in, and once the new living wage structure drops in off the top of that. That is just under £150,000 that we have to suck up overnight come April. There is no room to load this into price because the consumer has suffered enough over food inflation over the last number of years. So where do you go? You have to cut cost. And what's your biggest operational cost? Your payroll. So thinking that this isn't going to affect the working person, I can't see how it doesn't going forward. And crisis is a word. It really is the word to describe this. I have never seen. I've been able to mitigate some of the cost increases over the years that I've been doing this. This one is a doozy. And I've just refurbished one shop in the Royal Victoria Hospital. All my refurbishment plans are on hold because I need to see how this impacts us, and also the economic headwinds don't feel too great at the moment either. I can see that in consumer spending. We've already had a very soft week in January. I was +4 going into Christmas. I'm just now +3 coming out of Christmas, and I don't see that going the other way. So that means that my revenue streams come back, my margins will come under pressure as well. I can't articulate enough how really, really, really concerning this is, and I can't see how it doesn't knock on and doesn't drive us towards a really downward spiral.
Okay, thank you for that. Deirdre, is that you?
Yeah, no, I think that was it. It was just I was going to ask around the post office stuff. I know you might come in at the end, but if there's anything additional, Chris, that maybe you didn't cover, I think, just to send it into the committee then that we can send on either, to Westminster, but also the post office centrally as well. It would be useful. I know you touched on the marketing plan and the EPOS issue. And
sorry to interrupt, Deirdre, but the immediate thing that everybody could do is put pressure on the central government to say, are you going to back this transformation plan with you know, with Post Office, and what does it look like? And can we share it with the likes of the Federation of Sub-Postmasters, because we haven't even had an opportunity to input into that to know whether it's right and fitting.
We can correspond as a committee on that and I presume we'll double the clerk team will check. I presume it's the Department of Business and Trade who are in the lead in that, but we'll check and we will. I think if members are agreed, I think that's an action we can agree that we've asked. I just want one final question before we. Thank you. There's been a really useful session and lots of homework for us to do and work for us to take forward. It is deeply concerning on the cost of doing business. We are going to be holding, see the department's doing that research, we're holding further consultation events. I was saying the new year, it is the new year. And I think hopefully you certainly, and obviously by extension the broader retail, will get an invite to participate. And I think we're finalising that, we have the location, but we're finalising that, so we do want to hear more from you on that, and that will include the question of rates as part of that. That's the main locally, understanding that we're finances are under pressure, but we need to, where there's an intervention, we need to understand what it could or couldn't be. One, I guess, final question or two is really about and you did touch on it earlier on, Chris, about your relationship with, well, bluntly, you were very good about being candid, which is useful, again, direct about your opinions and detailed. Your experience with your banking provider as a small but established business, and concerning, and frankly, from the perspective of someone who, if I was an executive at that bank, I would be concerned that an established business has had a very poor customer service experience. It sounds like I don't want to put words in your mouth, but a poor customer service experience. What's the position? What is your, I suppose, start first of all with the local banks, because they're the ones who are established, and then if there's a broader perspective about banking, because obviously some people will be using, in your case, Chris, it's probably a bit harder because I don't know if Monzo do business banking, but some of the alternative banking providers, if you're a cash driven, if you know, it's a bit harder if you're an established, but some of the, I guess, more pop-up style businesses will be able to just use alternative banking providers because they're cashless or whatever. But what's the position of the Retail Eye members, do you think, in terms of banking services and how they're the quality of the service they're being offered versus maybe across the water and even across the border, if you have that information? And we don't have very much time this time, but an overview would be good if you have one.
Probably it's probably more helpful if we put something further in writing.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Chair. I think just that point about, and what Chris talked about, you know, when he was establishing his new company, the difficulties about setting up a bank account. Retail, we're not just working with obviously established retailers and wholesalers. We're actually working with hundreds of small agri-food businesses, helping develop their route to market, and you know, we're helping them connect up to retailers like Chris and to many others, and develop their business from that way. And one of the things they say is that the hassle they've had in establishing a bank account. And I think now a lot of that, in fairness to the banks, is a lot of the legislation around this in terms of money laundering and all of that. I absolutely understand that. But so surely I think we need to have a proper structured dialogue on all of these things. And one of the things I think might be something you want to reflect on. I mean, the Access to Finance Summit, they're useful events, and I think maybe that needs to be set up on a more regular basis. And that's something I think the Finance Minister, she indicated she was open to. But I think, you know, these are very grand, big events. They're a summit, you know. I think there needs to be probably a more structured engagement between all the different players, and including our members as well, on the banking side as well, credit unions, all of those players, that we can work through issues and challenges, and to make sure that, you know, we're very ambitious for this region. We want to see this region as the best place anywhere in these islands to locate, start, and to scale up a business. And despite all the economic headwinds and all the challenges, I think that is definitely doable. But we need to have probably that structured dialogue. And the problem for a lot of the banking stuff is it's not devolved. And a lot of the post office
but
stuff.
This is why we're having this inquiry, because we think it's important that we, even if it's not devolved, we have the ability to get it. In a sense, the market's devolved in large part because we have and the start network. Okay.
But banking, insurance, post offices are not
the policy isn't devolved, but the market is
the
local.
problems are certainly devolved anyway. Yeah.
On a slightly anecdotal level, I forgot, I've probably blocked it out. I went to another banking institution to open the account with. I terminated the application based on the telephone interview that came over the phones. I basically was like, it felt like I was being accused of being a money launderer.
Can I ask, was that one of the traditional four here, or was that a...
Sorry, if they form part of the traditional four.
Yeah. Okay. This is most useful. We are going to hear from some of the representatives going forward, and I think it's really important because the relationship between established businesses like yours, Chris, someone who's starting up, who's selling stuff at a farmer's market, or or people who are scaling up is really important.
Well, if you wouldn't mind, one last thing.
Of course.
It has dawned on me just as we came through that conversation. There are restrictive limits on bank accounts being able to deposit a certain amount of monies at the post office counter, depending on the account that you have in the bank that you're with.
Yeah. So you have the varying limits. So
correct.
Barclays might have a different limit, or
of which you could present to me as a small business. Let's say, and you come with £10,000, and I count all that money out, and I go to lodge that into your account, and then it's blocked because you've reached your capacity of what you're able to lodge in. Yeah. Those limits might be a rolling week, they might be a month, they might be a rolling year, depending on the bank, depending on the account, of which we have absolutely no understanding. Yeah. I lose that income because I can't complete that transaction. Yeah. That small business then possibly moves away from me because they know if they go to a branch, they can do that. They then take a higher risk because they store up their takings for longer to only do one trip to the bank rather than coming multiple times to me. And it feels like the anti-money laundering laws that come about from that feels like that we're like they're using a hammer to crack a nut. Okay. So why does the due diligence not fall back to the bank after the money has been received at our counters? Yeah. And then they work from there rather than a blanket ban that prevents me from being able to actually turn people away. So,
and I think just to conclude in this, Chair, we have a number of the main banks as members of RETA, and I think at times where we have had members that have had issues with banks, that sort of personal approach to the context that we have within those banks, we can resolve, but that's a face-to-face engagement at times. So I think it's probably, I suppose, one of the advice that we'd say, and we talk to the banks all the time, is probably be a bit more user-friendly, a bit more of a human face. Okay. And, because obviously the traditional aspect of the bank manager in the branch, the captain manager, that's all gone. We absolutely, banking. Really, yeah. So I think that, but in many respects, it's about working with the banking sector and having that dialogue, and that's why I think a proper access to finance forum that meets on a fairly regular basis would be a very useful action point.
I think that's really helpful. I think we're going to hopefully produce recommendations. I'm going to have to wrap it up there if that's okay, because we are over it. But look, thank you so much for your time, and genuinely thank you, because it is your time is valuable. There's specific bits of homework and actions we will give. The first one that you made clear to us is urgent. We are happy to correspond and make that clear to the and we will get ask for an urgent response on that, and we'll also outline in that correspondence the Northern Ireland specific context, which you've outlined, and we'll touch on the fact that, for example, there's an issue around the pick-up drop-off package situation.
One other part to that as well, and again, sorry, this is just how my brain works, Matthew. One, we have 50% less business opportunity as postmasters in Northern Ireland, which makes us unique because it's postmasters across the water serve, I think it's 1 in 60,000 people per capita, and we're on 1 in 40,000. So they have 50%. They serve 50% more of the population. So again, the Northern Ireland Post Office model needs to be considered, because we don't have the same access to population.
Really because of rurality, but at the same time, that also means there's less commercial opportunity. Okay, we will make that point now.
And that then links to the point that we have legislatively in the UK, we have a legislation that says we must provide 11,500 post offices within the network. Yeah. My experience of that in Northern Ireland is I can be cannibalised because an unviable branch closes outside my catchment area, and then all of a sudden the Post Office Limited are obliged to cite that branch somewhere. They approach another retailer, it comes into my jurisdiction, and then it potentially takes away, and it continues to destabilise because it erodes my business and my ability to keep the business going, and then it almost puts a noose around the other person's neck who takes that on board because it wasn't viable there. What makes it more likely to be viable? So it is quite broken in how that works. So less commercial opportunity per capita because of the amount of branches we have per capita versus across the water, and the higher operating costs are the big issues.
We'll definitely make those points, and we will seek more information from you in written form on the banking, as in US banking customers, as well as the post office context. Lots more to follow up on us. We'll keep in touch with both of you. Thank you very much for your time, Chris and Glenn. Genuinely, it's appreciated. and there's lots more work to do for us. And we thank you for your time. Okay, members, we have, I should say, we lost quorum for the purposes of taking decisions, so we're going to have to...
However, Chair, that action that was suggested was
agreed before while we were quorum, so we can proceed.
We can proceed with that.
So we can't really
can't do anything else.
We can't do anything else, which is convenient because it gives us the opportunity to adjourn. We will have to come back. It means that tomorrow pack your flasks and spare shirts and underwear, because we will have one heck of a lot of correspondence and matters arising to get through. Suffice to say, several bits of the correspondence are relatively routine, but we will have to do it all. I have to do my speed reading, which Edwin puts reprimanded me once for, but it'll be an asset next week.
Whilst Chair, we can't make any decision, I'm mindful of that. I do also know that they'll be listening in, so I would like to know what date they're going to bring the piece of primary legislation that they have promised us in January. What date in January?
Chair, I can offer some insight. I think the committee, and I will include myself in that, Chair, we're expecting that the early January date was for the committee. I actually understand the early January date was for the executive. So that I don't quite know where that leaves the committee, Chair, in terms of when that bill is likely to come. Because it will now obviously have to get some executive time.
This is the registration
bill. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think we can, if we're getting, we can't agree to get clarity because we're not quorum yet to agree to. But
they'll be listening.
They'll be listening. Okay. I don't think we can go through any of the correspondence, because even to note, we need an agreement to note. At this point, we will. I'll just say that the date, time, and place of the next meeting is at the same time, 2 p.m. Here in the Senate chamber next Wednesday. And at that point, the committee do not adjourn. We can get agreement to adjourn. Can we not even get agreement to adjourn the committee? We have to stay in this room until we have quorum. It's a very interesting philosophical question.
We can allow you to adjourn.
The committee do now adjourn.
Senate Chamber. Sound. 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 Senate Chamber. Sound.